So there are a lot of weird kind of genre-bending pieces of horror out there in the world. When I think of movies, the ones that come to mind are like Bone Tomahawk, which is a Western horror, or like Warm Bodies, which is a romance horror, right? I feel like usually when it's very jarring, it tends to be because it's mixing horror with a different genre that typically isn't horrific, right? It's like Western horror, romance horror. Cowboys aren't inherently scary to most people. But that kind of brings me to the topic of today, which is Christian horror. And this is when a lot of you in the comments are like, but isn't Christianity horrifying as it is? No, this is not a place to bully Christians. This is a place to bully young earth creationists and intelligent design proponents. But it turns out there's actually a lot of Christian horror out there. Usually it's written by like Ted Dekker or more commonly Frank Peretti. And when I was a kid, my dad read a lot of these books. He still has a lot of them at the house. And he, in classic fashion, he would read them. This is before the era of cell phones, so they would like pile up in bathrooms, right? So you'd be sitting there and kind of bored, you're sick of reading the back of soap bottles, and you pick up one of the Frank Peretti books that's sitting, next to the toilet and kind of look at the back and leaf through it. And one of these books left a permanent sear on my frontal lobe. I could never forget it because it's just so weird. And that book is Monster by Frank Peretti. I found this copy of the book in a used bookstore in my town that I live in. It's a college town, so there's a used bookstore. They have like a nice, kind of fiction section, religious fiction section. And I went out of there after having the memory of the plot of Monster, or at least the genre of Monster, it kind of pulled from the deepest recesses of my memories. So I went over there just to see if they had it, and lo and behold, they did. It is like that classic kind of musty color and smell of a used book. And I bought it for $3.95. So none of the money went to Frank Peretti. And I'm glad, because Frank Peretti is not the type of author that I really want to support. Allow me to elucidate the nature of this book. Monster is an anti-evolution book about Bigfoot. It is Christian fiction about Bigfoot with a creationism message behind it. And if you hear that and you don't really know what to do with that string of words, you are like most people who read the book Monster. The Amazon reviews for this thing and the Goodreads reviews for this thing are easily some of the funniest things I've read, maybe at least in the last month. So I kind of thought that what we would do, right, in video essayist fashion is we would read Monster together, right? At least some of Monster together. And we would explore kind of the scientific themes behind it, as well as, perhaps get a few giggles out of the fact that, this is like a Christian Bigfoot book. That is, to my knowledge, this is the only one of those that exists. This is an endling, right? As I guess that implies that there were others in the past. I don't know. This is just such a strange, such a funny concept to me. We're gonna read it together. I'm wearing my Fresno Nightcrawlers t-shirt because the Fresno Nightcrawler is actually my favorite cryptid, and Bigfoot is also a cryptid. So we're theming it today, even though we probably won't get this done, anywhere close to one sitting because it's a big book, and even though I'm not gonna read all of it, we're gonna read large chunks of it together. So, I would like you to join me on this journey. Strap in, perhaps with a good drink, maybe in a dark room to, kind of underscore the fact that this is meant to be a very scary book. And we'll read Monster together, just the two of us. So when I was deciding whether or not to buy this book, I cracked it open, right? And I just started leafing through it. And what really cemented it for me was the acknowledgments page, because the acknowledgments in Monster, here they are. I'll read them to you. It's not easy finding capable people who can get excited about somebody else's book when they have their own projects and commitments. These guys are special, and I thank them profusely for making this whole story Such a pleasure to tell. Here's who this book is acknowledged for, I guess. Here are the acknowledgments. Jonathan Wells, a postdoctoral biologist and senior fellow at the Discovery Institute, whose book Icon of Evolution first got my creative wheels turning and helped me clarify my main story idea over a pleasant lunch. Instant buy right there, right? Jonathan Wells is an intelligent design advocate. Second is Dr. David DeWitt, director of the Center for Creation Studies at Liberty University, who, besides being a brilliant scientist and technical advisor, is quite an imaginative story crafter in his own right. Another win, these two just instantly made me decide to buy this text, right? Like, you kind of don't have a choice when you run a creationism-busting YouTube channel. And then there's also Dr. Paul Brillhart, who's a family physician, and Nick Hoggemere, who is a real honest-to-goodness tracker whose knowledge and fascinating stories became the model for the character Pete Henderson. Thank you all for making Monster such an exciting, great adventure. Now, a little background for this that is going to be very important for you at home to appreciate what Monster is really about. Monster was written in 2005, which is the same year that the Kitzmiller versus Dover trial was taking place. The Kitzmiller versus Dover trial, for those of you who perhaps don't remember, Kitzmiller versus Dover, I would have been 9, so I've mostly remembered it because I've read quite a few books on the subject because it's so fascinating, is when the Dover School Board tried to introduce alternative textbooks that taught evolution to their biology classes. And the Bush-appointed judge ruled on the case that, 1, you couldn't do that, you can't teach intelligent design in schools, but because 2, he ruled that intelligent design is not science. So this was a big deal, and it's very interesting to me that this book came out during kind of the heat of the intelligent design versus evolutionism movement. We don't really hear all that much in the courts today about intelligent design, or really creationism for that matter, because that court case kind of put it all to bed, at least for the time being, until it rears its ugly head the next time. But, Peretti thought to write this book in the thick of it. This was on everybody's minds, right? Yeah, can intelligent design be taught in schools? And this is very intelligent design, creationism heavy text. So let's begin with chapter, oh God, I choked. The Lord is doing this to me. He's punishing me for bad-mouthing Frank Peretti, his favorite human. Chapter 1. So quick side note, this is me a couple days later. I did a couple of recordings and I realized in editing that I was reading far too much of the text. So instead, I took some time, I went through, I marked all the stuff that I felt was necessary to read directly from the book, and the rest will kind of go through together as needed. You'll still get the full Monster experience as intended by brilliant author Frank Peretti, but it is going to make the video from like a 6-hour video to like maybe a 2-hour video. We'll see. I'm long-winded, and most video essays are like 2 hours, so you can safely add an hour. Okay, so let's, for real this time, begin with chapter 1. The hunter, rifle in his hands, dug in a heel and came to a sudden halt on the game trail, motionless, nearly invisible in a thicket of serviceberry and crowded pines. He heard something. The eerie howl was clear enough to reach him from miles away, audible under the sound of jays and between the chatterings of a squirrel. So our hunter is clearly after something here. This is our human hunter, and he hears something howling in the woods. Now, knowing the background of monster, you are safe in thinking this is perhaps a Bigfoot or maybe big feet. So he moves through the woods until he eventually comes on like a logging processing area where there's all these piles of logs ready to be shipped off, and he finds a body. His gaze flitted from the truck to the bulldozer and then to the huge pile of logs, then back to the truck again where something was protruding from behind the truck's front wheels that caught his eye. He grabbed a compact pair of binoculars from a pocket and took a closer look. The protrusion was a man's arm, motionless and streaked with red. Could it be blood? Yes, it is. It's a dead guy. So the hunter sees this dead dude, and then he decides to hide the body and like make it look like, not hide it, but make it look like it wasn't killed, the guy wasn't killed by an animal and was instead killed in a logging accident. So he essentially pulls it over to this pile of logs and then uses the bulldozer to like tip the logs over, so it looks like this dude was just crushed by a bunch of logs. You know, as tends to happen frequently in the logging industry. You know, I say that, but I'm actually pretty sure that logging industrially is a very dangerous job. I'm not sure if it's actually because trees fall on you or if it's for another reason. It's kind of like underwater scuba diving, not underwater scuba diving, underwater welding, in that it's a very dangerous gig. Okay. So he knocks over the logs, and then this happens. As expected, he heard the slowly rising sound of vehicles coming up the logging road, climbing switchbacks, lurching through gears, rattling over potholes, and growling over gravel. That was a good alliteration. He crouched and headed for the trees, tossing away the branch. Just as he slipped into the forest, a truck pulled into the clearing on the other side. He stole through the crowded timber, planting every footstep silently in the soft pine-needled ground. Truck doors slammed, voices lifted, followed by cries of alarm. Those loggers were going to have quite a morning. So we are left wondering, why is it that the hunter is going after this probable Bigfoot, but also trying to hide the evidence that a Bigfoot has killed a man and make it look like a logging accident? We don't know, but we will find out. So chapter 1 continues. So we stay on Cave Lake Trail for 3.4 miles, and then we come to this fork where Lost Creek Trail branches off to the right. Beck, are you following this? Rebecca Shelton, 28, looked up from her compact, unhappy with her clumpy mascara, but resigned to leaving it as it was. Which trail? Her husband Reed, a 6-foot-tall hunk and very aware of it, was trying to be patient, she could tell. She'd seen that understanding but slightly testy expression many times over their 6 years of marriage. So this implies, of course, that they were married at 22. And this is my, gutsickgibbon opinion. That is perhaps too young to be married. Lots of growth happens in your 20s. I'm 26 and I'm planning on getting married here soon, but I also dated my fiance for several years, like 6 years. So, it's not a decision that you should take lightly, but, enough of me criticizing Frank Peretti's imaginary characters, marital and relationship choices. He pointed once again to the map that he'd spread out on the hood of their Ford SUV, their route boldly marked with orange highlighter. This one, Cave Lake, then this one, Lost Creek. Got it. So, Rebecca Shelton and our boy Reed Shelton are this newly married couple, and they're going out camping, right? They're going out hiking or camping in the woods that is presumably the same place where our Bigfoot is running rampant. Or big feet. Think about that. So they continue talking about how they're going to do this, and we reveal that Rebecca has a stutter. I'm going to read Rebecca as written here, so I want you to know that that is not me doing that. That is Frank Peretti. Okay, so if we average 4 miles an hour, we can be there in 3 hours, he was saying. He went again, Beck sighed, and Reed stole a sideways glance at her. But considering the rough terrain and 2,000-foot climb, I've allowed for 6 hours, which can still get us there before dark. Got your canteen? Check, said Beck. Well, check was supposed to sound cool, but the word made her stutter flare up, especially now when she was upset. Potable water only, remember? Treat any water you collect before you drink it. But beaver fever? Exactly, Reed answered. Beaver fever. According to Reed, beavers pooped and peed in the creek, so they weren't supposed to drink the water or they would catch whatever contagion the beavers were passing, something she wouldn't even try to pronounce. So I understand that Beck has a stutter, But the disease that they're talking about is Giardia, which is not that hard to pronounce. I think Beck has already said words that are more complicated than Giardia. But I do appreciate that they call it beaver fever. There's an explicit joke to be made there, I'm sure. So they continue on. They're basically just spending the next several pages talking about like how they need to be prepared, and they're fighting about it. So Reed is being kind of bossy, and Beck is being, you know, kind of annoyed with him being bossy. She specifically notes that she got to pick only the color of her backpack, but not like the type, because Reed is kind of a control freak. I'm not 100% sure about like the constitution of this marriage, like how long this marriage is going to last, but it seems like they've been doing well for themselves so far. I sure hope that, you know, a Bigfoot related incident doesn't exacerbate already existing problems, which is something that I imagine can happen. Then we jump perspectives to two of our other primary characters, Dr. Michael Capella and his wife Sing. Dr. Michael Capella, a stocky, dark-haired college professor in his 30s, was driving 228 in a Toyota 4Runner. Okay, so we've got like a nice Toyota versus Ford situation going on here. Ever climbing into the mountains, his eyes intent on every curve, every bump, every rut, as he maintained a speed just a notch short of dangerous. His wife, Sing, a lovely Coeur d'Alene Native American, sat next to him, her face covered by a list of concerns, not the least of which was his driving. So Sing is going to be a character that I consistently like. I like Sing. Sing is probably my favorite character, next to, of course, some of the potentially non-human primates in this text. So they continue driving, and they're basically talking to one another about how they're going to meet Reed and Beck up for this camping excursion that they're doing all together. And they're meeting a wilderness guide, Randy Thompson, who's going to help them kind of rough it, learn new skills, do things like that. But Sing and Cap are not driving not hiking all the way up to the cabin. They're first stopping at a wilderness resort called Tall Pines. And it is here that they walk in, see that it's indeed very rustic and kind of, what would the word be? Like Joe Rogan chic, maybe? It's just got a lot of like stuffed animals, not stuffed like plushies, but stuffed like taxidermied everywhere. And it is here that they meet the owner of Tall Pines, a man named Arlen Peak. And Arlen Peak basically explains to them that the area that they're in, weird things have been happening recently. So he tells them that once they get up to, the cabin where they're supposed to meet, Reed and Beck and Randy Thompson, that they should just be kind of careful. And of course, naturally, Cap and Sing are like, okay, why should we be careful? Cap drummed one finger on the counter. Is there a specific danger we should be aware of? Peak thought it over, came to some kind of agreement with himself, and answered, "You may have noticed that there aren't a lot of folks around. Not that I don't want their business, I surely do. But what I know, I tell them, 'cause I know what I know, and nobody's gonna tell me I don't." He's a classic guy, a wordsmith. Then he nodded towards a yellowing poster tacked on the wall. Cap thought he'd seen this picture before, a blurry blow-up of a massive, ape-like creature. It strode on two legs across a log-strewn riverbed. Suddenly, his uneasiness melted away. "Bigfoot?" Sing said. Cap could tell she was holding back a smile. No, I'm not laughing," she said. Peak's eyes were intense as he listened to something only he could hear, an old memory playing in his mind. "I heard one howl once, maybe 8-9 years ago. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. Chilled my blood." Sing leaned close, obviously intrigued by the old man's earnestness. "What did it sound like?" she said. I like Sing. She's trying to get him to do like a mimic of what he heard, and I like that. Sing she's a trickster. She's a prankster. He wrinkled the bridge of his nose, listening some more. Something between the howl of a wolf and the roar of a lion, real long and echoing, scary. So Cap and Sing are kind of like, okay, so you heard this once like 9 years ago, and that's leading you to believe that there is, a Bigfoot haunting these woods. So Cap's like, okay, whatever, like we'll be careful. He's just trying to ease Peak's worry. Sing was looking at the glass display cabinet immediately below the poster. Inside were yellowed news clippings, photos of footprints, and in the middle of it all, a plastered cast of a huge footprint. "Huh, look at this," she said. Cap leaned against the counter, detached and happy to remain that way. "Guess you're quite the Bigfoot enthusiast," he said. "Not by choice," Peak answered. I don't know why I'm going southern with Peak. Ever seen one? Asked Cap. Nope. Ever seen a wolverine? Cap thought this question was a little strange. No, very few people have, said Peak. But it's out there, isn't it? I like this line of research because I think you could really apply this to literally anything. I've not seen a cougar in person, and I've also not seen, a unicorn, right? But what Peak is arguing is that both of them are out there effectively, except swap with Wolverine and Bigfoot. So they continue chatting, and Cap is like, okay, that's kind of weird thing to say, but because, Peretti is writing this, he's like, oh, that's actually a really good point now that I think about it. And at this point, they kind of go to their room and retire. While our friends Cap and Singer are checking in, the intrepid heroes Beck and Reed and their kind of troublesome relationship with one another are doing this extensive hike. Beck is talking about how she's still annoyed with Reed, but she is pretty in shape, so she's like keeping up pretty well. But eventually they get to the cabin, and they notice that not only is the cabin trashed, like the windows are blown out and refuse is everywhere, but Randy Thompson is not there. So they continue to look around for Randy. They're trying to find him. They make jokes to one another, and Beck is continuing to stutter. This is something that's really being imposed on us, that Beck, in fact, does have a stutter. And eventually, they decide that what they're going to go ahead and do is set up camp away from the cabin and await Cap and Sing to arrive to kind of like replan. They're going to, regroup. That's the word I'm looking for. They're going to stop and regroup after that happens. So they're minding their own business, getting ready to go to sleep. It's dark. They're at their camp, which is, meters and meters and meters away from the cabin. And all of a sudden, they hear something. More noise, something moving. I think it's near the cabin, Beck whispered. The cabin's that way, said Reed. What way? That way. I can't see what way you're pointing. You get some nice comic relief here in the middle of what is potentially going to be some sort of attack. I can't see where you're pointing. Well, just sit tight in. The sound was nothing like they'd ever heard before, and it wasn't quiet. It was so clear, so loud, that even though Reed knew it wasn't somewhere down in the ravine, or rather it was somewhere down in the ravine, it seemed as if it was right there next to them. It was like a woman wailing in grief and anguish, weeping over the corpse of a loved one, her cry rising, wavering, holding, and then falling off into a hissing sob. Then, gone. Silence. Snap. Crunch. Whatever it was coming up out of the ravine. The woman wept again, her voice quaking, the note rising into a nerve-rending peak, and then trailing off. So whatever they're hearing, perhaps whatever it is that trashed the cabin, is coming up out of the ravine, going to take them out, perhaps. So they're thinking, they're nervous at first. Both Beck and Reed are very nervous. Then all of a sudden, Reed is like, this has got to be a joke, he insisted. Cap and Randy Thompson are trying to scare us. Well, what makes you so sure? Said Beck. Well, it's obvious. Everyone knew we'd be coming up here one day before Cap and Sing, and then Thompson just happens to not show up. Then we start hearing stupid noises out in the woods. It's a big put on. Beck sat there, her frightened face indirectly lit by Reed's flashlight beam. She longed for him to be right. He kept trying. Don't you remember when we were going to United Christian and we went to that party for the young couples group? Sure. Well, we all went for that hayride in the back of George Johnson's truck, and then Beck interrupts and says, and then the truck broke down and a bear came out of the woods. Her nerves calmed. And it ended up just being, what's his name? Mr. Farmer wearing that bear rug, Reed snickered. But you sure were scared. I was young, and so were you, said Beck. So they're kind of poking at each other, having a lover's quarrel, as it were. They sat still and listened. So you think that's what it is? Beck asked. So Reed calls out and he tries to call, to Cap and Mr. Randy Thompson and basically say, hey, quit faking. And of course, naturally, no one answers. I'd like to note that we will get more information on how Reed and Beck met at United Christian. It is very wholesome, but not in the funny way. Okay, so they keep hearing it. They smell something horrible. And then all of a sudden, something rustles behind Beck. It came to a whistle again, this time low and hissing. She spun around, hands shaking, and shined her light up the hill, across a row of tree trunks, past a black chasm of nothing. Over more trunks, something glimmered in that black chasm. She returned to the darkness between the trees. She knew what it was. anytime Jonah, their dog, of course he's named after a biblical character, looked back at a flashlight beam, anytime a cat would look in a car's headlights, their eyes always reflected the light back, like what she was seeing right now. So, quick note, primates, specifically haplorhines, lack a tapetum lucidum, which is that structure in the eye that actually causes reflection in most mammals, really. So this is already a problem because we are applying something that effectively like no primates have, right? We're applying that to what is probably a Bigfoot. But, you know, you're going to see a lot of Frank Peretti messing up primate anatomy and also evolution. So they see, you know, the eyes in the darkness, and all of a sudden they are horrified, right? Because they're like, oh my God, this is actually some kind of giant creature. So they run, they start trying to climb up a tree, and all of a sudden they see a wide-eyed, crazed-faced man dropping down into their beam of light. He was upside down, swinging, flopping, limp, and purple with death. His legs snarled in the branches, his long braid dangling like a black viper below his head. The man's head was barely attached. So Randy Thompson, his corpse is in a tree, and they're like, oh my God, this is not a joke. Something has killed Randy and hung him up in a tree, and they continue to run. They're running, keep hearing this thing pursuing them in the darkness, when all of a sudden, the rocks broke away under Beck's foot. She tumbles sideways, then fell headlong over the precipice, flipping end over end. She's falling over the side of a waterfall. Her backpack absorbed some of the impact of the rocks, but she was still tumbling, her flashlight flipping midair. Her head hit, and a blinding flash exploded in her brain. Reed heard her go down, and he searched with his light. Beck! There she was, flailed like a rag dog on the rocks below, 10 feet down below the trail, her leg dangling in the flowing water, a streak of blood reaching down her face. He found a way down, a slow but sure course through brush, limbs, and saplings. Beck! So he basically tries to save Beck, but something comes out of the darkness, grabs Beck, and disappears into the forest. So Reed tries to find Beck. Of course he can't. He shelters until the next day, and then we hone in on Reed and a whole bunch of different police officers and emergency personnel, as well as Captain Singh, who joined him, trying to decide what to do next, and reporting that Beck is, of course, missing. So naturally, everyone is a bit suspicious of Reed because, you know, Reed's wife has gone suspiciously missing in the darkness, and he's got a wild story to tell about how something basically snatched her. So they call in a professional tracker, and a few characters that I want you to introduce you to are Sheriff Mills, who is the local sheriff, as well as Pete Henderson, who is our tracker. Pete Henderson, search manager and tracker, was already sizing up the situation when Mills met him in the center of the parking lot. Huh, Jimmy's here, Pete said. So it was a bear. You're here, so someone died, and you've got me and my searchers here, so you can't find whoever it is. Pete is very astute, of course. Come on. As they crossed the parking lot, Mills gave Pete an abridged version of Reed's account. You are kidding me. Reed said that? Let's hope his head starts to clear up. So the whole gang is getting ready to go out and search for Beck when Sheriff Mills basically comes up to Reed and is concerned about him because Reed is obviously almost catatonic because he doesn't know where his wife is, and everyone is effectively telling him that she's probably dead, killed by a bear or something along those lines. So Sheriff Mills was listening. It was supposed to be good for her, Reed said, supposed to get her out of the house and get her to where she could just live a little without having to talk to anybody. Out in the woods, there aren't so many social rules, you know? No expectations. He looked at Mills squarely in the eye. She would have aced it. She would have done great. I know she had it in her. I don't think people give her credit. Mills nodded. She would have aced it. You're right. Reed's eyes teared up again. He looked away to clear them, to clear his mind. I just didn't want her to be afraid anymore. Reed, look at me, Mills said. Reed met his eyes. The gaze coming from under that hat brim was kind, but not to be trifled with. You and Beck signed up for a challenge, Mills said. Well, now you've got one, and there's no teacher, no pretend, no trial run. There's just a truckload of real trouble, and Beck doesn't need you fumbling around and getting in the way because you're wallowing in what should have been helping her out. She needs you to get your mind cleared, up and on the problem. She needs you to do your job. We all do. He rose and went for the door. We're pulling out of here in 5 minutes. Let me know what you decide. Because Reed is trying to decide whether or not he'd be of more help out there with them or staying close to home. So Then Reed ends up in the lobby. He decides not to go because he's too messed up, and he ends up in a conversation with Arlen Peake, our Bigfoot enthusiast. Reed looked towards the glass case. "I never saw one before. It's hard to find anybody who has," Peake said, "and anybody who has usually won't talk about it." "Have you ever seen one?" The old man shook his head, almost sadly. "No." Reed knew it would be safe to tell this man. "I think I have." Peake approached and spoke gently. "Son, you need to be sure about that. I don't want anybody thinking I've put ideas in your head." Reed gazed at the big footprint. "Do they make a crying sound like a woman? Not screaming, but, wailing and crying?" The innkeeper half smiled and shook his head. "How do you know?" Reed asked. "Let's just say no one's ever heard one do that." "Do they smell bad?" Reed asked, "like the worst armpit in the world?" Peake hesitated just a moment, then answered, "Only when they're frightened or upset. It's what a lot of apes do. It's a defense mechanism." So for record, my master's is in primatology, and no, apes do not spray out a gross smell like a skunk would. That is not a well-known ape defense mechanism. Of course, humans are also apes. We are members of the hominid family, and we do not do that either. Now, perhaps all of us sweat a lot when we're scared, and that sweat smells bad, it reeks, but that is not a defense mechanism. Do they howl and scream like, well, apes do? The old man's silver fillings twinkled in the window's light. Now that I've heard. Do they whistle? Reed tried to mimic what he'd heard, the long soaring whistle with little warbles in it. Now Peake actually straightened, staring at him. So, as this is happening, you're obviously getting the impression that Peake is like, oh crap, it seems like he might have actually seen a Bigfoot. And meanwhile, Beck awakens. She is in the arms of some giant creature with a lot of hair. She looks up and meets its eyes. The eyes were dark amber with muddy brown around the iris instead of the usual white. So this is going to be a recurring theme, but creationists like Frank Peretti do not know that other hominids can have white sclera, much like we do. Here's where I flash the pictures of that. They were intense and probing, studying her as if she were a specimen under the microscope, deep set under a prominent brow. The face was a reddish brown, leathery like an old saddle, bordered by thick, straggly hair. Beck felt hot breath on her face in sour little puffs. The bulging lips tightened around a row of white teeth. The thing whistled at her. The same whistle Beck had heard in the dark when glowing eyes bored into her and a dead man dangled from the tree. So Beck has been kidnapped by a large ape. So this hominid, this Bigfoot, is cradling Beck, and she looks up and tries to assess what kind of creature is holding her. She turned her head just enough to study the situation. She was being held by what appeared to be a huge ape, similar to a gorilla, but not quite a gorilla. The crown of its head extended to a narrow crest like a gorilla's, and it had a prominent brow ridge over the eyes, but the jaws didn't protrude as much, and the lips were much more flexible and expressive. As near as Beck could tell, the creature's legs were folded beneath it, but one large hairy foot jutted out with a wrinkled, hairless sole and all 5 toes aligned in a row. By its ample, fur-covered bosom, Beck concluded it was a female. They were now sitting in a cavity created with a tree upended, pulling the root ball out of the ground. Thick bushes, most of them huckleberries, had since moved in and now provided a blind that hid them from the outside world. The female held Beck inescapably in her lap with her left arm while feeding Beck with her right. So this lady Bigfoot is feeding Beck by shoving huckleberries into her mouth. It feels like something you might accidentally stumble across on DeviantArt. It's a very weird situation, but we also need to note that this female Bigfoot has a sagittal crest, which is something that we pretty much only see prominent sagittal crests in males, in gorillas, and in extinct hominins, we only see sagittal crests in male paranthropines. So, again, a little bit of research would have perhaps helped this out. So this female Bigfoot continues to feed Beck, but not in an angry way. She's kind of being sweet to Beck, and Beck is very scared. Meanwhile, the search team has called in the help of some dogs, specifically a German Shepherd named Caesar, and they are, hopefully going to find Beck. They don't find Beck, obviously, but what they do find is hair. They all looked and saw the spindly, mostly dead branches on the lower trunk of a pine, either bent or snapped in the uphill direction. "A bingo," said Pete. That's what it says. A bingo. Selecting some tweezers from his pocket and plucking a long reddish hair from the jagged stump of a limb. The hair gave him pause. He handed it back to Don. "That look like a bear to you?" he said. Don held the specimen up to the light. "Well, maybe. Kind of long, though." Pete asked Reed, "What color is Beck's hair these days?" Reed examined the hair that Don held in the tweezers. "Reddish brown," he said. Pete exhaled a half whistle. "Whoo, lordy." Don placed the hair in a Ziploc bag. Pete then stood, probing ahead with his narrowed eyes. Finally, he let out a held breath. "Okay," he said, "we've got another one." The body of Trackers inched forward again. This one was more visible, a roundish impression in some humus, so that's like the top layer of soil, or one of the layers of soil. To Reed, it looked as though someone had knelt there and left a knee print. Pete went on his belly again, eyeing the print carefully, then measuring it. He straightened up, still on one knee. He was troubled, eyeing the area between the two prints. "Where are the front feet?" he said. "We've missed something," Don said as he flagged the print. "Well, we'll find him," Pete said. "Either that or this bear has one hell of a stride." So they think it's a bear because bear hind prints sometimes look a lot like human prints, but they're not finding any front paw prints. So he's like, "Uh-oh, this bear is walking on 2 feet." So the team continues to search the area. Jimmy, who is one of the searchers, bullies the dog, Caesar, because Caesar keeps getting nervous about the prints that they're finding, obviously because Caesar is a dog and knows that whatever they're searching for isn't a bear and is actually something much scarier than a bear. But this does not stop Jimmy from calling the dog names and being mean to it generally. At the same time, they also don't find Randy's body, even though Reed has basically taken them to the spot where he says that Randy was found, hanging in the trees when Beck and him were running from, the Bigfoot. But they don't find him, so this is kind of weird. They're like, why isn't Randy here anymore? They, of course, find Beck's backpack, which is been crushed and torn to pieces, and Reed is concerned about this, obviously. I forgot to mention this earlier, but Singh, who is Cap's wife, she's the Native American woman, she's like a forensics expert. She does forensics for the FBI or something, so she's helping out in a big way. She's giving us her usual wit, which is lovely because Singh is my favorite character. And meanwhile, Beck is still with this big female Bigfoot, and the Bigfoot is still feeding her stuff, and she's trying to figure out what to do, when all of a sudden this female Bigfoot gets very nervous because another Bigfoot has arrived on the scene, and this is kind of how this goes down. Beck looks across and sees this big gray mass, from across this small creek rising up out of the bushes. Beck let her eyes move up a little more. The creature was nearly standing upright now, almost 7 feet tall by Beck's estimate. It was another female, a mass of muscle covered by dark gray fur and a little thinner than the first one. Although the movement of its fur stood out, it bristled, making it appear larger and anything but friendly. It uttered some pig grunts that could have been an inquiry. Beck's female gave some pig grunts that could have been an answer, and it extended an open hand. The other female ignored it, eyeing Beck with vicious suspicion. There was another stirring in the brush. A third creature appeared. It was steely gray in color, judging from its size, and a youngster. It sidled up to Big Gray and gripped her leg, joining her in staring at Beck. This one appeared to be a male. I'm assuming that this is because Beck can see its genitals, but I can't know that for sure. This is Bigfoot genital speculation by me. Beck stole one quick glance at its eyes. He was unflinching. He stood at least 5 feet tall. The face was pale like a baby chimp's, and the hair on its head stuck out in wild directions. If she'd seen this thing in a zoo from a safe distance with bars between them, she probably would have thought that he was cute. So what's going on here is the new female, the gray female, is being mean to Beck's female. They're kind of at odds with one another. And the youngster is also not a fan of Beck. Meanwhile, Reed is arguing with Singh and Cap because he's insistent that whatever killed Randy and took his body is not a bear. He doesn't think it's a bear. So Sing is like, listen, you need to calm down. And if you really think that it's not a bear, then we should test that hair that we found. And she turns basically to Cap and she's like, you should do it. Sing tossed up a hand. He found some prints. Some of them could have been Randy's and some of them were just, well, I'll tell you what I think. I think Pete does have some doubts about the bear theory, but he's waiting before he says anything. Nobody knows what the real story is here, said Cap. So what were you sniffing the pack for? Reed said. What? You were sniffing the backpack. You were looking at the hairs. What were you thinking? Reed, I wasn't thinking anything. Reed and Sing locked eyes with him. Well, nothing serious, Cap said, so Cap has obviously got this idea of what he thinks it is. Sing leaned towards her husband, empathetic. We need to identify those hairs, Cap. Cap looked cornered. Why look at me? You have friends at the university who can do it. Remember, Cap is a college professor. They are not my friends, Cap said. They locked eyes with him again. Well, okay, some of them are my friends. They might be anyways. Sing reached into her backpack and pulled out the plastic Ziploc bag sealed with red evidence tape. The hairs were in it. She tossed it to her husband. He tossed it back. I am not going back there. I can't. He felt their gaze again. All right, give me one more reason and I'll think about it. Reed then has dinner with Arlen Peake, Bigfoot enthusiast, and we are treated to a recollection of how Beck and Reed met. He'd often been asked, how in the world did you ever get to know each other? This is because it is continually pointed out that because Beck has a stutter, she's hard to communicate with. It wasn't easy. They'd first crossed paths in St. Mary's, Idaho, when he was a well-established high school senior and she was the new girl in school. I sincerely hope that this is implying that Beck was new and also a senior, and not new and a freshman. I was weirded out when I was in high school when 14-year-olds dated 18-year-olds, and I'm weirded out by it now. He'd seen her at school, but they actually met in church, which, he'd often reflected, was a good place to meet a girl. Okay, we know Frank Peretti's a Christian, that's fine. She was a shy, introverted, and awkward newcomer to the youth group, devastated the first time the youth pastor called on her to read a scripture aloud, terrified of conversation, and slow to make friends. Nevertheless, he'd already eliminated most other girls from his field of interest, and though he could never explain it, he just found her fascinating. So it's a little worrisome, the language that is used here. It kind of feels like, how one might talk about buying a prize mare for racehorsing, right? For like a good thoroughbred mare for racing in your local track. He had eliminated most of the mares from his field of interest, but one of the mares just simply fascinated him. This is kind of, this doesn't strike me as a mutual respect kind of thing. But let's continue. Their first date was a movie. They just watched the movie and didn't have to talk. Then after he promised that talking wouldn't be required, they took a pleasant afternoon walk along the St. Joe River. After that, he took her bicycling, which they enjoyed in silence. When he took her out to dinner, she pointed at what she wanted on the menu and he ordered for them both. The silence between them took some getting used to, and he often caught himself babbling to fill the dead space. Nevertheless, it was in those quiet times that she could be amazingly articulate with her eyes and playful, even teasing, with the corners of her mouth. So I don't think that there's anything, really weird about getting to know somebody who doesn't speak. There are plenty of folks out there who are mute, and they get along just fine romantically. But this, paired with some of the earlier, cues that Reed has dropped for us, makes it feel kind of condescending, right? Like, even though she couldn't talk, even though she was flawed, it was a good date and they felt like they got to know each other. It also feels a bit strange that, Reed kind of enjoys not having to converse with his romantic partner. I don't know, it's a bit weird. I can't really put my finger on it, and I hope that none of this is coming across as ableist. I mostly just mean it in the sense of, Reed has previously kind of suggested that he is sort of the commanding pants wearer in the relationship, and it almost seems like he's talking about how he's really struck gold with someone who has trouble articulating themselves verbally. It's just a bit odd. There's more searching, and, Reed meets up with everybody with a newcomer to the scene, a tracker named Marty Elkhorn, who is also Native American. This is the following day. Reed offered his hand. "Have you met Cap and Sing?" Elkhorn nodded, his face grim, his wrinkles deep in the bounding light of the flashlights. He looked up at Sing. "Pete tells me you're Coeur d'Alene." She nodded. "Shoshone," he replied. He gazed at the print that was starkly lit like a feature on the moon. "So you must know the warnings, the things our fathers taught us." Sing gazed over Pete's shoulder at the print, her face eerily cold and statuesque in the weak light. "Tsiako?" she said. Elkhorn nodded, his eyes chilling. The wild men. Pete looked up from his work. "Marty, I do appreciate your traditions, but this is an animal." "No, don't think that. The Indians didn't make up the Tsiako. They were here before we were. We knew about them before the white man came, and they have always been with us. Every tribe has its own name for them. Oma, the hairy giants. Skookum, the evil wood spirits." Sing offered, "And I believe the Salish word is Sasketch." Elkhorn nodded. When the white man came, he pronounced it in his own way, Sasquatch. This is also kind of a weird exchange to me. I'm not saying that, Peretti shouldn't have put this in there, but it just feels like a weird conversation. It feels a little condescending. And then later, we get one of the trackers saying that after Elkhorn leaves, because he's, spooked by the superstitions that he holds, one of the trackers refers to him as a crazy Injun, which is great. Now, don't get me wrong, these guys are painted as kind of rude for saying that. It's just kind of a little bit stereotypical of an interaction, if you get my drift. So they continue talking and chatting, and then we get this conversation between Cap. Cap says, "I've seen how it works," Cap said. "People believe what they want to believe, and if they want to believe something badly enough, they can see things that aren't there or not see things that are." Cap is saying this, and I want you to put a pin in it because this is going to be a very ironic statement sort of later on in the text. "So what are you saying?" Reed said. "I'm saying," Reed could tell that Cap was trying to be careful, "I'm saying we really, really want Beck to be alive. It's the driving force in our minds right now. It's dominating our emotions." "So," Reed said, "so what if we just don't want it to be a bear?" So Cap is basically saying, all this Bigfoot stuff is basically Reed trying to come up with an explanation that isn't going to end up with Beck having been eaten by a bear. In the meantime, Beck is hanging out with her Sasquatch mother, her Sasquatch surrogate mom, and eventually, they're trying to fall asleep. She's like sleeping by this big Sasquatch, this big Bigfoot, and eventually this this Bigfoot realizes that she's uncomfortable and starts to build a nest. Beck watched in amazement. This big ape was actually building a nest to sleep on. Beck wondered why it had taken her half a night of sleeping on rocks to think of it. Now the beast was gathering leafy limbs from the surrounding undergrowth and laying them on top of a framework that she'd made, mashing them down with her hands. So Beck is shocked that, great apes make nests to sleep on, which is, of course, something that many great apes do today. Like, chimpanzees do this, orangs do this, gorillas do this. This is not exactly shocking. But one thing that should be noted is that the intelligence of the Bigfoots is frequently framed as much like the intelligence of your dog. So they're smart like a dog can be, but they are not human smart. And this is going to become relevant later. So we continue to see Beck interacting with her female and also the gray female when eventually all of the big feet here, the two females and the little juvenile, get nervous because a newcomer is on the way. The big newcomer sensed, most likely smelled, something outside the normal before he even got there. He'd been moving swiftly, silently, like a spirit through the broken forest and over the rocks, but now, just outside the grove of firs, he moved one careful, exploratory step at a time, sniffing and huffing suspiciously, looking about for whatever was wrong. This had to be the daddy, all 8 feet of him. He was covered in coarse black hair. His face was one big scowl and a leathery mask, and Beck had never seen such piercing eyes, each cornea reflecting the moon in a diamond of light. He carried a slain deer in his left arm, its head dangling on a broken neck. Preoccupied, he dropped it. So this is the big male Sasquatch. This is the big male Bigfoot. Beck knew what was wrong. She was wrong, but she hadn't had a clue of what to do about it. All she could do was cower behind the red female's big frame, and that option vanished. Abruptly, the other female dropped face down on the ground, bowing on all fours with her head low, rumbling and clicking her tongue in homage. Beck's female, as if reminded of her manners, dove to the ground and did the same. The young one, because he was male or because he was just a juvenile and not had expected to know any better, did not participate in the ritual but sat where he was, glancing in Beck's direction as if to guide the alpha male to the proper target. So this is weird, and also betrays a lack of understanding of hominids. Now, it seems to me that what Peretti is doing is he's kind of modeling these Bigfoot social structures as to gorillas, which live in sort of one male, multi-female harems, where one male kind of has control or monopolizes multiple different females. But he's framing this as sort of a brutish patriarchy, which is weird because that's not how gorilla societies work. Yes, there can be clashes between females and males, but the females effectively kind of control the power in these one male units. And by the power, I mean if the male doesn't keep them happy, they will leave and join another male's harem. It's not like the male, physically aggresses them into submission and into staying around. Now, he'll get upset if he catches the female stepping out, right? But it's not like this weird, it's not like this weird, domestic abuse analogy that it seems that Peretti has set up here, where the females are inherently lesser than the males in this hominid society with the Bigfoot, and that they are afraid to do anything around the male because he's in charge and will kill them if they do anything he doesn't like. It's got to be modeled after gorillas, or an attempt of modeled after gorillas, because chimps don't live in one male multi-female societies. They live in multi-male, multi-female groups that are polygamous, so no one is stepping out on anyone because everybody's mating with everybody all the time. And it's definitely not modeled after bonobos because they are much more, they're dominant, they're co-dominant, so males and females can and females can rank above males and, do in bonobos. There's usually an alpha female, and this coalition of alpha females will bully males. And the only males that rank above females are the sons of the alpha females. Chimps can be patriarchal, but, they also aren't always. It really depends on the group. So this is just a weird anthropomorphization of this imaginary hominid society. This is the only, if Bigfoot were real, if Peretti's big feet were real, they would be the only social structure that looked like this, right? Where you have a dominant male that, beats the females into submission, and other males are co-dominant with that male. If anything, he would potentially be aggressive towards his son as his son started to age. Maybe Hamadryas baboons are the closest thing to this, but these are supposed to be hyper-intelligent hominids, so it doesn't really work. This big male sees Beck and is not happy that she's here, and then the big male starts to beat the shit out of Beck's female for having Beck present. Beck's female rose to her knees and reached for Beck. The male shot forward, took the female by the scruff of the neck, and threw her into a row of young firs, bending them over like field grass. She screamed, arms covering her face, white teeth glinting in the moonlight as she slid down the bent trunks. So Beck is just nervous because she's like, what the heck? She could still hear the female screaming and the alpha male roaring. She heard the blows and felt the ground shake. It didn't matter that she had no idea where she was. The only thing that mattered was being elsewhere, anywhere but here. She pulled herself up, pushed herself up, and counting the inches, was desperate for distance between her and the others. Next, the battered female that guards Beck sits down, and all of them start to partake in the deer carcass that the big male has brought, and he allows Beck to have some for herself. Beck looked the other way, feeling sick. How could God create such creatures? Even worse, how could he throw her in with them? She never asked for this. She wouldn't have been able to conceive of such a horror to even ask for. The female grunted and nudged her. She winced and would not turn her head. The female nudged her again, grunting, and Beck ventured a timid look with one eye. The ape was offering her a string of meat. So Beck eats some of the meat, and then says, Beck couldn't speak it, but the big red lady and her hot-tempered gray rival reminded Beck of Rachel and Leah, Jacob's two wives in the Bible. Leah could bear children, but Rachel could not. Beck didn't know if this was the case here, but she felt sorry for the red lady anyways. She gave the hand a little pat and looked up into the quizzical leathery face. Rachel. Humph. Rachel replied, rotating the deer's head in search of another bite. Beck watched the others who were still eating, wolfing down the heart, liver, and gnawing on the ribs of the deer. She'd made their acquaintance, she realized. They'd sniffed and studied her, etc., and she'd eaten from the deer's head. Naming them would be appropriate. The other female's name would have to be Leah, the biblical Rachel's rival for the favor and attention of Jacob. And the brat? Well, the biblical Jacob's firstborn son was named Reuben. It was difficult to give a name to a creature she didn't like, but it would have to do. So she has named this polygamous group structure, this polygynous group structure, rather, after the biblical characters of Jacob, Rachel, which is Beck's female, and Leah, which is the other gray female with the son who she's calling Reuben. It seems weird to me that, you know, this polygynous group that is very aggressive and has a very rude patriarch that is, of course, like nothing that we tend to see in the hominids, is being mirrored after a biblical family that is, I guess, somewhat similar, that Peretti sees similarities. So it's weird that he's like, this is bad the way that they're organized, but they're also very similar to a polygynous biblical family. So we'll just call them the same names as them, right? So they're Sasquatches, and they are watching over Beck. The next scene, I'm not going to read any of it because it's kind of boring, but there's a close call where the searchers almost find the Sasquatch group, but at the last second, Jacob, Rachel, Leah, Reuben, and Beck all flee to somewhere else. Beck, obviously not by choice. She's scooped up by Rachel, even though she can kind of hear that some of these people are about to find her, and they bail, and of course she is not found. Meanwhile, our friend Dr. Capella has returned to the university that he used to work at. Yes, used to. I wonder why he doesn't work there anymore. Caps watched, smiling but impatient, as the brown capuchin, commonly recognized as an organ grinder's monkey, ran after the rubber baton and brought it back to Nick Claybuckle, the trainer, or rather, the researcher. "Good boy," Nick exclaimed in a pet lover's tone of voice, handing him a grape through the bars of the cage. "That's my Sparky." The little monkey gobbled the grape down, shooting a side glance at his cage mate, a male of similar size, age, and appearance. "Now watch this," Nick said over his shoulder to Cap. He tossed to the second capuchin. "Okay, Cyrus, go get it." "Go get it." He tossed the baton to the far end of the cage. Cyrus sat on his haunches, his eyes shifting unhappily from Nick to Sparky and back again. Nick held out a slice of cucumber as an incentive. "Bring me the baton and you get the cucumber." Cyrus turned, walked away, and sat at the wall, pouting. Nick looked at Cap, sharing the landmark moment. "Do you see that, Dr. Capella? Inequity aversion, pure and simple." He straightened, beaming at the results, and gripped his clipboard to jot down some notes. "You know how it is with capuchins. Cucumbers are, okay, but grapes, wow, they're to die for. Cyrus will trade the baton for a cucumber if Sparky gets a cucumber. But if Sparky gets a grape, hey, no fair, I'm not playing." Nick, rotund and bespectacled, that's, okay, Rubenesque, one might say, would have made a great nerd in high school. Golly, just coming after Nick, huh? Come to think of it, he made a great nerd as a graduate student. Cap smiled and hinted, "Should I have brought a grape?" "Huh?" He caught on. "Oh, sorry, I was just, the experiment. I was really into it. And yeah, I turned in your sample." So evidently Cap has sent the hair found at the site to our friend, our rotund and bespectacled Nick, the graduate student. Now, the thing that just happened with the cucumbers and the grapes, this is actually a reference, I guess, to a pretty famous experiment by Franz de Waal and his team, where they did show inequity aversion in capuchins. They understand fairness, which is interesting because a lot of this, and I want to make a note that Peretti is kind of trying to downplay the importance of this by saying, it's kind of stupid. It's, so what? They can understand fairness. Well, this is a quality that we used to previously consider, a human distinctive quality, right? We understand justice and fairness and no other primate does. Well, this is a capuchin, right? This is a brown capuchin, so specifically Cebus apella, a New World monkey that understands fairness, right? This isn't, an ape, right? It's a monkey. So clearly this has very deep roots, this understanding of, hey, not fair, that we should both get the same thing. But Peretti wants to downplay it because eventually, they're setting up for, yes, monkeys and apes are smart. Yes, Sasquatches are smart, but humans are special and they will never reach our level. Hence, we did not evolve from them. Not extants, but from even primitive, ancient Miocene versions of them. Okay, and I'm going to show a video here of that happening, of the Franz de Waal experiment.
So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. and we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us, and that's what she does. And she gets a grape, and she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Nick scanned the room, his fingers drumming his clipboard. Halfway down the row of cages within earshot, a young female undergraduate was observing how capuchin monkeys reacted to their reflection in a mirror. Nick whispered, that's Carol. She's doing a perception analysis. You know, cognitive processing of non-typical sensory inputs. Cap whispered, so? Does she know you? Cap stole another look. I don't believe so. Let's walk around anyways. So clearly Cap is not liked by his colleagues, and clearly Cap does not think that these types of experiments on cognition in New World monkeys like capuchins, so again Zebus apella, he doesn't think they're important. They turned down and walked casually out of Primate Lab 1, went one door down the hall, and peeked into Primate Lab 2. This room was long, like the others, clean and well lit, with a bank of cages along either side. These cages housed rhesus monkeys, that's rhesus macaques for those of you keeping track at home, or macaque mulata. Some playing, some sleeping, some just staring through the bars. There were no humans in the room at the time, so Nick stepped inside and Cap followed. When the door clicked shut, Nick took a CD from his pocket and handed it over. The bottom line, the results came back inconclusive. Cap winced. That was quick. No, I think the lab really did the sequencing, but the sample was contaminated. Oh, come on, I brought a whole truckload of hair samples. There would have been more than enough DNA present, not to mention the PCR implication. Hey, I'm the behaviorist, said Nick. All I know is what they told me. Well, can I get the samples back? They tossed them. Cap was incredulous. Hey, Dr. Capella, come on, that's what they do. I told you I wanted the surplus returned, said Cap. Don't you ever listen? No, you don't. That's why I almost flunked you. Okay, a little personal there, Cap. Nick is called, rotund and bespectacled and effectively called, someone who would clearly be bullied in high school. And now we're calling back to previous grievances when, poor Nick had to take Dr. Capella's class. Hey, I was having problems with Maribeth back in. You remember that? Okay, I see. So Nick pulls is what I'm hearing. So is that your problem now? Your love life? Nick brightened at the very thought of it. No, it's just great. It's Susie Barton. Remember her? Did you tell them the samples came from me? Nick had to return to this world. Well, yeah. Nick! They asked me. What was I supposed to do? Lie? That cooled Cap's jets. No, don't start doing that. There's enough of that around here already. It's a very loaded sentence. One, cooling the jets. Love that phrase. Love that we're trying to bring that back. But what is clearly being alluded to here is that Cap suspects that there is lying going on in the primate lab and is also still having a bad relationship with pretty much everybody there. Nick's face held that same imploring look that Cap used to see in biology class right around midterms. Listen, Dr. Capella, it was primate poop. No question. I ought to know. I got my bachelor's cleaning out monkey cages. I know my poop. Nick is just an absolute find. He is a catch, the entire package. That's quite a distinction, Nick. Okay, Cap. Jeez. Proud of it, said Nick. Cap softened, smiled, and patted him on the arm. I owe you one. You did a lot for me, Doc. I wouldn't have gotten into the graduate program without you. Hey, the droppings were diuretic. Did you notice that? Yes, said Cap. Your ape was ticked off about something. He has a bit of a temper, Cap said. What are you working on anyways? Cap patted him on the shoulder. I need you to help me find that out. He turned to leave. Are you spying on Burkhart? Nick said. That made Cap stop and turn. Should I be? Well, somebody ought to do something. I don't like having to cut back when he shrugged it off poorly. Never mind. Never mind what? Cap said. Nick backed away with a head shake of regret. Nothing, really. I mean, with all due respect, sir, if you're going to make a bunch of waves again, I just don't want to get sucked into it. I've got a nice job here. Cap cracked the door and looked to be sure no former associates would see him. Well, I can't tell a lie either. You deserve to know. There are going to be some waves. So, I think we should get the obvious out of the way that's being alluded to here. Very clearly, Cap was booted from the program because he is a creationist. Now, we're going to get to that later, but It's really interesting how all of this is going to tie in together because, and you'll see this later, it doesn't do so in a coherent fashion, which is weird because this is a book written to say effectively one real point, right? That evolution can't do it, it's got to be intelligent design. Seems like a simple concept to kind of paint, but you'll see what I mean. So again, I'm going to skip a couple of pages. Basically, all that happens is the body that was hidden by that mysterious hunter from the beginning is found. They're really confused as to how he ended up, you know, underneath a bunch of logs when it looks like he's been mauled by an animal. But that being said, Singh kind of just takes note and continues onward. And then we find Rachel and Beck with the other Sasquatches. And they have stumbled across a nice surplus of fruits, right? Rachel is super excited because she sees an apple and she's like, sweet, I get to eat an apple instead of, you know, deer viscera. And she twists her ankle after getting, you know, her ass kicked by Reuben, who decides to take the apple from her. So the young Sasquatch beats up Beck and takes her precious apple, and then she ends up twisting her ankle. One step and her ankle punished her. She screamed in pain, nearly fell, then recovered her balance. So suddenly, so scarcely she saw it happening, the apple was gone. She yelped at the sight of her empty hands. Her eyes immediately went to the ground, searching, darting everywhere. But Reuben had left her, and she could easily see why. He walked away with a triumphant high head gait, his hand to his mouth. She heard the apple's flesh snapping and crunching deliciously between his teeth. Leah punished Rachel with one more slap across her shoulders, and then she retreated, gathering up her thieving son. So this is the kind of drama that I like to see in Monster. Monster is at its best when Beck is like trying to eke out a living amongst these Sasquatches who are just absolutely brutal to her. And, you know, Beck is, well, I'll just tell you how Beck responds. Oh God, where are you? Beck cried. How could you leave me like this? She collapsed to the ground, whimpering. It just wasn't fair. She heard a familiar pig grunt above her, and for a moment a huge silhouette blocked the sun. Rachel sat behind her, sniffing, panting, and moaning little sounds of comfort. Leaning so close Beck could smell her breath. A scent of pear still lingered. She gently groomed her hair that fell across Beck's face, and then, leaning back, offered Beck the only consolation she had. A cat tail. So Beck is not thriving, right? She's having a little mental breakdown, a little mentee bee here. But at least Rachel is there to comfort her with the delicious taste of a fresh cat tail. I can only imagine how that went.
I found some wild glizzies. Oh!
So we move on to Cap having a conversation with his wife, Singh, who is, you know, lamenting that they found this additional dead body at the lumber yard. And Cap is on his way to the library to use one of the computers to further look into the results that Nick had given, our rotund and bespectacled friend Nick had given him. He said goodbye and folded his cell phone, feeling careful. Discreetly, he rotated his head and got a visual on who might be working or lurking at the other computer stations, and then eyed the flow of patrons on the main floor. Absolutely nothing appeared out of the ordinary, and he worked on this campus long enough to recognize ordinary when he saw it. The University Research Library was a modern, inexhaustible depository of knowledge. 6 floors, miles of stacks, and millions of bound volumes. It was the haunt, this second home, of millions of graduate students across the world and doctoral candidates who created their own offices in the study booths along the walls and maintained a steady flow of traffic in the elevators. It was a quiet, somber place where great minds could meet and challenge new frontiers as long as they did it quietly and brought in no food and drink. There hadn't been any murders here lately, maybe a flasher or two up in the stacks, but certainly no spies or killers. Cap relaxed and smiled to himself. Okay, he thought, I'm a bit careful. He directed his attention back to the computer screen, trying to sort out and make sense of and interpret the inconclusive findings that Nick had brought back from the Judy Lab, the campus nickname for the Judith Fairfax DNA Sequencing Core facility. The files on the CD that Nick had given him were burgeoned with row upon row of the same 4 letters. A, C, T, and G, adenine, cytosine, thymine, and guanine, in a myriad of combinations all representing specific strands of DNA from hair, stool, and saliva samples. These were the clues, the indicators that would tell him what kind of creature the samples came from, and the specific strands could be matched with a known creature, if they could be matched with a known creature. Fortunately, DNA sequencing had reached such a level of sophistication that blah, 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 blah. He's basically just talking about how good DNA sequencing is, as well as how contamination works. We're getting a nice little lesson. Then we get this. The field was full of stories of misidentification due to foreign DNA somehow getting into the mix. DNA from a triceratops was once found to be 100% identical from a turkey to DNA from a turkey, but the researchers could never be sure whether the dinosaur was really identical to turkeys or whether someone eating a turkey sandwich during sequencing contaminated the sample. That is a lot to unpack. So, DNA has a half-life of about 521 years, so even if Peretti is doing like the young Earth creationism thing, this still doesn't really make a lot of sense. But moreover than that, this feels like they're trying to cast doubt on comparative genomics while simultaneously saying that comparative genomics is going to solve the problem for Dr. Capella here. Now, a triceratops being 100% identical to a turkey is even more ludicrous. One, because if they were 100% identical, then they would just be the same thing. They would either both be triceratops or they would both be turkeys. But I guess what he's trying to do is say, this is how easy the methodology can fail. Researchers really are that stupid, right? They would get 100% similarity back from a triceratops and say, look, this triceratops is actually just 100% genomically identical to a turkey. And I suspect that the reason that they're doing this is because Peretti wants to cast doubt on the humans are 98.8% similar to chimpanzees, right? So I don't know, if that's really gonna feel right to me after reading something like this, which shows that Peretti, through Cap, who is supposed to be at least moderately trained in this, knows so little about how comparative genomics actually works and what similarity actually means. Cap kind of hints that he wants Eisenbaum to work with him, and Eisenbaum is just like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then he leaves Cap in the dust. Cap was disappointed. Eisenbaum had always struck him as a lone eccentric, not affected much by department politics. Back to square one. Cap returned to his computer station and slouched in his chair, staring at the computer screen in case God might send a revelation. It's the little drops here and there that really let you know where Peretti's coming from. Did these results really make sense in their own bizarre way? Many of the sequences from stool, hair, and saliva samples matched chimpanzee DNA, but there were just as many sequences that matched up with human DNA. At first glance, one would think that either the chimp DNA was contaminated with humans or the other way around, except for an entirely distinct third group that seemed to be an odd hybrid of both. It closely matched chimp, and where it didn't match chimp, it closely matched human. Contamination would not have caused that. To make matters worse, mixed in throughout it all were weird sections that didn't match up with anything. They were junk DNA, unidentified contaminants with no explanation for how they got there. Unless Cap saved all his findings to a fresh CD and tucked the disc away in his pocket with the CD he'd gotten from Nick. He had a hunch, but he needed someone to test it and hopefully tell him that he was wrong. He needed someone who loved him to tell him how wrong he was about virtually everything. Someone who would pull no punches. He immediately thought of just the person. Judging from the cold reception Cap got from Eisenbaum, it might be tough getting through to him, but no matter. Cap was desperate enough. So there's some more searching for Beck with Reed's gang and Sheriff Mills and Pete the Tracker. None of it is very funny or interesting. Then back to Beck with the Sasquatches, where a bear kind of charges the group. Where was that Rachel? Just above her, something let out a roar so deep and so loud she felt it in her chest. She wiggled and looked up just in time to see Rachel leap over her and land directly in the bear's path. Rachel's hair bristled like a brush, enlarging her outline. The two bodies collided like a thunderclap, rolled and grappled, impacting tree trunks, shattering limbs, throwing leaves and dirt, pounding and gouging the ground. Beck heard it and only partially saw it until Rachel stood in a shaft of ghostly moonlight, hefting the huge black mass as it kicked and flailed. With skill, quickness, and astonishing power, Rachel took the bear's head in both hands and whipped its massive body about until the neck bones crackled and the bear went limp. She whipped the body again. It hung like a sack of lead in her hands, motionless. She shook it to be sure, then dashed it to the ground, heavy, contorted, and dead. Reuben was still bawling. Leah was moaning and clicking at him, no doubt trying to calm him down. Jacob huffed from somewhere close by, pushing towards them from the undergrowth. Rachel was still angry, her hair bristling, her nostrils steaming, her canines flashing in the dim light. She reached down, grabbed 2 handfuls of bear hide, and hefted the bear over her head, dashing it to the ground again. The guts tore loose with a mashing sound that made Beck wince. Interesting tidbit here, it seems that the Sasquatches are not sexually dimorphic in their canine length, which is fun to note. That would mean that they are more similar to the Siamang, the sexually monomorphic Siamang, than they are to, say, a rhesus macaque. But it's very weird because their social structure mimics the sexually dimorphic gorillas, so boy, it kind of seems like there's some inconsistency here that might align with perhaps not doing one's research on the primates that you are modeling the Sasquatches after. Rachel breathed heavily as she came towards Beck, hands extended to gather her up. Beck cowered and shied away. Don't touch me. She'd heard the terrible screams before and been terrified. She'd seen Randy Thompson's brutally murdered body and wondered what hideous monster could have done such a thing. Now looking up into Rachel's dark and wrinkled face, she knew. So Beck is under the impression that Rachel killed and mangled Randy Thompson's body. Next, the Sasquatch gang moves to the area where they found the fruit earlier. They're back at the fruit area. We get this lovely exchange. Now Beck could see Jacob far ahead, a silhouette in light but invisible in shadows. He strode across river rocks and leaped over fallen logs, maintaining a demanding pace the 2 females were expected to keep up with, even with heavy children on their backs. The image was hauntingly familiar. Men, always showing off. She should have named Jacob Reed instead. Get him, Beck. Get him from afar. Sniped. Then Beck makes excuses for Reed's behavior. Oh, Beck, such thoughts, she told herself. Jacob was a bloodthirsty, flesh-tearing beast. Reed was a man, and what she wouldn't give to be home with that man right now. Sure, he was one-upping and offending her at every turn on the trail, but that was just his clumsy male way of helping her grow. He'd pushed himself and her before, and she'd been offended before, but it was just his way. He was a man who relied on strength and youth, but still a boy tripping over himself trying to grow up. He meant well, and sometimes, like right now, she could see it that way. This is infantilizing to men and offensive to women. This is somehow managing to be sexist in both directions simultaneously, so excellent job, Frank Peretti. So they eat from the fruit pile, and Beck gets this idea because she's noticed that this appears to be an apple orchard or a fruit orchard. So she decides to take her chances and write her phone number in the dirt so that when the farmers come by next, they'll see her phone number, they'll report it, and they'll realize that Beck is still alive and has written her phone number in the dirt. But then she gets bullied by the Sasquatches and only gets some of the phone number out. Then we move over to Cap, who is still, I suppose, on the university campus, and this happens. The gorilla was doing a clumsy line dance without the line, the tops of its running shoes plainly visible above its phony slip-on feet. It carried a placard that read, "Apes have rights," and from under the plastic ape-faced mask, a young man's voice chanted in a monotone cadence, "Freedom for our brothers, freedom for the apes, freedom for our brothers, freedom for the apes." He was one of about a dozen chanting protesters gathered for their Thursday morning demonstration outside of the York Primate Center, an old but renovated brick structure on the Corzine University campus. The gorilla suit was a new feature Cap hadn't seen before. On the other hand, Cap, in a loud tropical shirt, straw hat, and Bermuda shorts as well as sunglasses, was a sight the protesters hadn't seen before. Not that he was unusual. The protesters, most of them students with too few causes and too little time, or too much time, liked to dress in outrageous ways to draw attention. Besides the gorilla, there was a cheap Kmart version of the orangutan from Disney's The Jungle Book. I'm sorry, do you mean King Louie? Because that guy's awesome. An overweight Tarzan in a loincloth and fright wig, and a scientist in a white lab coat splattered with red paint. When Cap joined them and took up their chant, they were happy enough to count him as one of their own. It was mostly during the summer months that these folks displayed themselves at the Primate Center's gated parking entrance, waiting for the ape killers, torturers, and exploiters to venture in or out. Any car leaving or arriving would have to run the gauntlet and endure the latest chant of outrage. Cap had driven this gauntlet on many a Thursday himself. I wonder what Cap was doing so frequently in the Primate Center. Someone had given Cap a sign to wave. Where have all the primates gone, it said. He held it high and utilized a few dance steps of his own, trying to blend in as the chant broke apart and abated in the lull between cars. Hey, you're new here. He was being addressed by the group's leader, a brassy-voiced young woman with garish purple hair and enough metal in her face to set off an airport alarm. Colors bad and piercings bad. Thank you, Frank Peretti. Not really. I used to work here, Cap said. At the Primate Center? Yeah, a little bit, but mostly in bioscience. I taught biology. Tarzan quit talking to the gorilla and turned to listen. Why don't you work here anymore, the leader said. I was fired, said Cap. Cool, said Tarzan. How come, asked the gorilla. I kept finding problems with Darwinism, said Cap. The response was predictable. The little gasps, the incredulity, the wagging heads, the side glances and snickers. You're kidding, a young woman in a lab coat cried. I thought you were a biology prof. Molecular biology, said Cap. How can a biology prof have problems with Darwinism? How can a Darwinist have a problem with anything? So what are you doing here? She sounded a little suspicious. Don't you care about our brothers? You mean the apes, said Cap. Yeah, the apes. They're our brothers, our closest relatives. The gorilla added, we're 98% chimpanzee. Cap tried not to sneer. We taught you that, he said. So they have rights just like we do, said the woman, and we're going to stay here until those rights are recognized. This was a prompt. The others cheered. Yeah, rights for the chimps. Set 'em free. Cap countered. Have you been in there? The primates aren't being abused. This is non-invasive research, strictly behavioral. The worst they do is give primates cucumbers instead of grapes. Some moaned, the others wagging their heads, some rolled their eyes, and Tarzan got hostile. Hey, don't lie to us, man. They're being held in cages, aren't they? Said the orangutan. Again, King Louis. The woman got right in Cap's face. That's what they want us to think. Sure, maybe the apes here on campus aren't being abused, but what about the ones off campus? Off campus? Cap asked. How do you... A girl decked out like a tree with the toy chimp coming out of her branches. Her arm shouted, "Car coming!" They scrambled into lines on either side of the driveway, took up the chant, saying, "Freedom for our brothers, freedom for the apes." The gorilla broke into his line dance. Tarzan yodeled a yell. The orangutan spun in circles, waving his arms, and the little tree swayed in the wind as the gate lifted and the car rolled through. Hey! Hey, Baumgartner! Cap yelled. The driver braked abruptly and honked. You're gonna get arrested, the little tree cried out to Cap. Cap raised his sunglasses as he leaned over the hood of the car. Baumgartner, it's me, Capella. The driver quit honking and stared through his windshield. Cap took off his straw hat. Cap! Michael Capella? The driver rolled down his window and stuck out his head. Cap, are you crazy? Cap handed his sign to the gorilla and ran around to the passenger side, shouting through the closed window, "We gotta talk." Baumgartner anguished for a moment, then reached over and opened the door. Cap settled into the passenger seat, closed the door behind him, blocked out the din of chants. Sorry for the get-up, but they wouldn't let me in to see you. Dr. Emil Baumgartner hit the gas. Well, let's get out of here before anyone sees you. So, as an academics enjoyer myself and current grad student, I would be shocked if undergraduates were this passionate about Darwinism and dissenting from it. Also, this should be, if you were reading this book and didn't know anything about the premise, this would be your first warning sign that Peretti is an intelligent design advocate who is also, I guess, really behind the times, because Darwinism is not something that is, like, taught in schools and on college campuses. We teach the mechanisms of evolution, and we talk about how it impacts the lineages of certain organisms, including humans. My graduate study is in biological anthropology, so that would be what we teach. Of course, the setup to this is to say, okay, behavioral ecology, dumb and stupid, and genetics and molecular work is good and based. So, of course, Capella, who finds problems with Darwinism, is a molecular biologist, and, of course, the students dislike that. Also, 98.8% chimpanzee. We are not 98.8% chimpanzee. That's actually just a straw man. Of course, the students are saying that, so maybe it's on purpose. I'll give Peretti the benefit of the doubt. But we do share 98.8% of our coding base pairs with chimpanzees, right? So that stuff is conserved since our last common ancestor, which is cool and really interesting, and very easily proven, right? You can just look up the 2005 paper that Steve Schaffner is on it. It's not very difficult to do. But this book, you should know, very frequently gestures to the idea that that is actually a bad and wrong figure, but it never actually explains why it's bad and wrong. It just keeps saying, hey, you've heard that we're 98.8% chimpanzee. Well, that's stupid, and you're an idiot. And that's about as far as it goes intellectually on that particular issue. So Arlen Peake gets made fun of more for being a Bigfoot enthusiast, and then we move to Cap having a conversation with Dr. Baumgartner at Baumgartner's house. Cap, it's impossible, Dr. Emil Baumgartner, jacket and tie removed and shirt collar open, sipped from his coffee cup, then smiled with amusement. Oh, it's all very intriguing. It would make a great story, but it's impossible. Baumgartner had driven them home, a very comfortable Victorian on the south side of Spokane. They were seated at a wrought iron table in Baumgartner's patio, enjoying a latte while a timed sprinkler chitted in rainbowed arcs across the lawn. Cap's computer and notebook rested on the table between them, its screen filled with the data from the Judith Fairfax DNA sequencing core facility. Impossible. Cap loved hearing that word coming from an evolutionist. There is your second warning. This is the one, right? If you hear evolutionist, you're either talking to someone from the 1990s or before, or you're talking to a creationist. Especially Baumgartner, an esteemed anthropologist and research associate at the York Center. Over the years, he'd been Cap's kindest opponent in the evolution debate. Pause. There is no debate, right? Evolution is just something that happens. The people who debate it are kind of mostly debating with themselves, while scientists do their real work, kind of unknowing that these guys are still bopping around. But remember, this was in 2005, so this was when there really did seem to be a debate, even though it wasn't, again, a real debate. It was more of a public discussion in the marketplace of ideas, and it was taking place in Dover, right? They'd had many discussions in many places, some private, some public, at various volume levels, but they'd still managed to stay friends. Are you sure you still want to say that word? Baumgartner laughed. I'm not afraid of it. I think it all the time. Cap laughed aloud out of courtesy, and then you leave it to the poor stooges like me to say it or write it. That was your choice, but it amazes me now that you of all people would think that it's possible when you've basically ended your career arguing that it isn't. Burkhardt thought he could prove it, Cap said. Baumgartner rolled his eyes and snickered. Still does, so does Merrill. Cap and Baumgartner talk back and forth, and Cap learns that Adam Burkhardt, who was his staunchest opposer in the evolution debate, is getting additional funding by Merrill, who is one of the main big authority bureaucratic guys at the university. So they continued to talk. All right, Baumgartner took another sip of coffee and set the cup down, pensively watching the lawn sprinkler. When you argued that an organism is much more than the sum of its DNA sequences, you were right. I agree with you on that, Baumgartner said. So you also agree that we can't find specific genes that govern particular behaviors, like swinging from trees or preferring grapes to cucumbers? Or that make Homo sapiens walk upright or even read Shakespeare? Agreed. So, I don't think anybody ever said that you were going to find specific DNA sequences for specific behaviors. But I guess that's what you get when you consult someone like Jonathan Wells, creationist, for a text like this, right? DNA is what codes for, your phenotype, your physical characteristics, and how those characteristics develop over time in utero and then as you age into an adult. They can predispose certain behaviors, but they don't choose what behaviors you're going to do, right? And then they also say that makes Homo sapiens walk upright or even read Shakespeare. That's also kind of funny because, walking upright is something that multiple hominins did, not just Homo sapiens. But I'm sure we'll talk more about that later. But Burkhardt seems to think you can. He's wasting a lot of money. The anthropologist caught himself again. I didn't say that, he continued. Anyone can lay human DNA beside chimp DNA and sort out the similarities and differences, even quantify them. As in, we're 98.8% chimpanzee, said Cap. You can't embarrass me, Cap. I didn't coin that phrase, so I'd be a richer man if I did. But as you pointed out, and I agree with you, we can find patterns in DNA. We can even ascertain what creature or plant the DNA came from. But we can't create the code in the first place, nor can we rewrite it. It's far, far too complex. CRISPR would disagree, right? We rewrite DNA constantly. So that is, I don't even think that this being in 2005 is a good excuse for saying something like that. And then, of course, again, they make fun of being 98.8% chimpanzee, and they have an anthropologist say it as though that gives it some kind of authority. Sorry, a fictional anthropologist say it. Because, like, yeah, we are. We do share that much DNA with chimpanzees, and they share that much with us, making us their closest living relatives. They're closer to us than they are to gorillas, right? But I digress. What they have to do is they have to create an authority figure and then have that authority figure say some dumb nonsense in order to back what it is that they're, about to say. And of course, this create the code in the first place, that's just like an origins or bust argument, right? That's like evolution can't be true. We haven't solved how life came to be 3.8 billion years ago. Okay, but those are two unrelated processes. How life evolves once it's here is completely different from, how it comes to emerge in the first place, right? That's like the difference between how do you make a car versus how does a car drive, right? They have a little bit in common, but they certainly are different things. Okay, Cap was surprised to find Baumgartner so full of concessions. Wait a minute, no argument in favor of site-directed mutagenesis? Baumgartner laughed. Do I detect sarcasm? You've argued for it before, remember? In reverse, Cap, reverse mutations. If we can identify the mutation that knocked out a healthy gene, we can use site-directed mutagenesis to restore the original gene and rescue a mutant, returning it to normal. You've seen that for yourself. Okay, that's one for you, Cap said. Thank you. For that, you get a bonus. He lowered his voice as if enemies might be listening. However, in all the years of mutating, we've never actually improved anything. We have never produced an individual more fit than the original. Another concession delivered in private, in confidence. Well, given that, what about the argument that insects mutate and develop resistance to insecticides? Baumgartner glared at him in mock anger. So this is how you return my generosity. Cap lifted an eyebrow. You used that argument on me in public. Now that we're off the record? Baumgartner took a prolonged sip of his latte, apparently trying to build up the willingness to say it. You're right about that, too. As long as the toxin is present, then of course selective pressure is going to favor those mutants that are resistant, at which point it's tempting to cut short all observation and conclude a beneficial mutation. But all you have to do is remove the toxin and keep observing, and you'll find that the resistant mutant has so many other weaknesses that it can't compete with the normal insect, and it dies out. It's a bad trade, like someone with sickle cell anemia being immune to malaria but then dying from anemia. There's no real benefit. He flopped back in his chair, smarting from his own words. If you were still the least bit respected in the scientific community, I never would have given you that. But since no one will listen to you, okay, we have to talk about this for a second, because this paragraph right here is all you need to read to know that I kid you not, Frank Peretti and evidently everyone he consulted on this book does not know how evolution works, or how natural selection works, or what fitness is, okay? And that might seem like an exaggeration, but let me explain. So all fitness is referring to is differential reproductive success, right? Can you reproduce more often than, the individuals that you're competing with and pass on your genes to the next generation? So if you have a trait that gives you some kind of advantage over them, maybe it's, heavier fur, and now that the climate has changed to being colder, you survive longer, you reproduce more, and your offspring will potentially have that kind of long hair as well. The key here is that if you took that individual, that long-haired individual, and smacked it in the desert, all of a sudden what was beneficial in one context is now detrimental and reduces fitness, right? It's going to overheat with all that extra fur. What Baumgartner is arguing here is that means evolution is broken. What he's misunderstanding is that what is beneficial to fitness is context specific and always has been. This is something Darwin noted when he wrote on the origin of species. But these guys didn't even bother to look up the definitions for what fitness is and how natural selection impacts it. In this situation, the insects that resist the pesticides are more fit than the regular insects in that context, right? They will survive the pesticide and produce more offspring, and then their offspring might be resistant as well. It doesn't matter if they're less fit than those insects in the original context, because that's not the context that they are competing in, right? This is just so ridiculously dumb. I can't I can't really fathom it, honestly. It's insane. And then, of course, they throw the sickle cell anemia thing in there, seemingly not knowing that, and maybe this is just how it's written. Maybe they do know the difference, but like sickle cell anemia does confer resistance to malaria and makes you anemic, right? But if you're a carrier for sickle cell anemia, then you're not anemic, right? Maybe slightly in some cases, but I mean, that's similar to a normal population. But you still have the malaria resistance conferred. So the selection wouldn't be for sickle cell anemia, it would be for being a carrier of sickle cell anemia without fully expressing it because both alleles aren't present. Okay. Baumgartner relaxed, the worst over, and said tampering with DNA is like a child trying to fix a high-tech computer with a toy hammer. It's always an injury, never an improvement. And we have a boxcar load of dead, mutated fruit flies and lab mice to prove it. Cap paused and watched the sprinklers for a moment himself. You understand what you're saying? Baumgartner nodded. Something I would never attempt to publish. That mutations aren't beneficial? No, that would be plagiarizing your work, said Baumgartner. So what is being revealed to us here is that Cap is an intelligent design proponent who has previously said mutations can never be beneficial. And Baumgartner, in secret here in this conversation, is agreeing with him. Of course, both of them are incorrect, as I hope I just elucidated to you here. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of beneficial mutations that we've clocked in mammals alone, let alone other organisms. I'm only saying that your tampering with DNA would be injurious. If you're trying to alter the genetic code of a chimp, for example, you would get one of three results: a normal, unchanged chimp, a deformed, retarded chimp, or a dead chimp. Cap was startled. Why would you concede that? He said. Because we've achieved all three, said Baumgartner, sipping from his coffee cup, effectively hiding behind it. This is just, gah. It's just so wrong, you know? I mean, I understand that this is fiction, right? So, you know, it's kind of allowed to take certain liberties within its own universe. But to be that blatantly incorrect after consulting with scientists, right? I don't think there's an excuse for that, even if those scientists are creationists. This is pretty basic stuff. Okay. But for Cap, this was news. You tried to alter chimpanzee DNA? Baumgartner squirmed as if he'd overstepped. We tried it, we learned, and we abandoned the project for professional and legal reasons. There's nothing more to be said about it. What about Burkhardt? I won't go there either, said Baumgartner. I suspect he didn't abandon the project, Cap offered. Baumgartner shot him a correcting look. Okay, Cap said, lifting his hands into the air. Baumgartner finished his coffee. By the same token, I have nothing to say about your DNA results except to repeat my position. What you're suggesting is impossible, and I think we've proved that at great cost. So, would you care to comment about the scuttlebutt I got from the protesters? Baumgartner laughed derisively. Well, they said that some chimps were being taken off campus away from the center. Cap, we can pretend that you never had a clue as to how things are run on campus. We can pretend that you hung yourself in total innocence and that you didn't know the damage you could do to science. We can pretend that you haven't noticed that you are now, for all intents and purposes, unemployable. But Cap, make no mistake, I have noticed, all your former colleagues have noticed, and there is, of course, the confidentiality agreement. I can't help you any further. Cap took the blow and nodded. It's a matter of survival, I suppose. Baumgartner agreed with Cap one last time. I suppose. Then he looked away, seemingly interested in the rest of the world beyond their conversation, his way of signaling that the conversation was over. I'm just trying to find out why my best friend's wife is missing, Cap shrugged. He knew it was a low blow, but it was the best he had. He reached down to close his computer. Baumgartner put out a hand and stopped him. However, I might pose a rhetorical question. And it is only that, a question. Cap left the computer turned on. Pose away. Baumgartner looked away again, as if we were trying to talk to someone else. What if you were Burkhardt and you had the Merrills breathing down your neck, demanding results, because he had big backers breathing down his neck, demanding results? And what if a certain Dr. Capella's published contention that evolutionists have no ultimate basis for being honest is in fact true? Cap didn't quite know how to answer. If Baumgartner was cutting him a break, he didn't want to ruin it. Could you, expound on that question a little? Baumgartner would not look at him, apparently his way of having the conversation without really having it. Well, just for the sake of discussion, if you were expected to, say, bridge that 2% gap between humans and chimpanzees to demonstrate how we originally diverged from a common ancestor through mutations, how many base pairs you would need to change, rearrange, correct, or mutate in precisely the right order using site-directed mutations alone, Cap already knew the answer. He and Baumgartner had publicly debated this topic on several occasions. The human genome contains some 3 billion base pairs. 2% would be 60 million. Baumgartner nodded quietly, seemingly amused by the numbers. 60 million, he said. That would be a lot of changes to make, even if you had the 4 million years we think we had, and of course every single change would have to be beneficial. Imagine how daunting that job would be to an ambitious anthropologist in his mid-40s. Baumgartner turned his eyes to the computer screen as if to confirm something. Given all this, if you were Burckhardt, how would you attempt to cheat? Would you perhaps entertain the possibility of moving wholesale amounts of DNA, even whole genes, the quickest way possible? Suddenly, Cap knew where Baumgartner was going, and it was so obvious it was embarrassing. He leaned towards the computer and began to see in those myriad confusing lines a pattern he hadn't put together before. Viral transfers, he said. Baumgartner pointed out some of the lines himself. Your junk DNA might not be the junk you thought it was. He leaned back in his chair again, acting aloof. Then again, maybe it is. Huge horizontal transfers can get messy. You're never quite sure where the new information is going to land or how the organism is going to turn out. Cap grabbed his computer. Emil, you might just be a real scientist someday. You know that? He waved it off. I was only posing a question. So we have to talk about this for just a minute. First of all, apparently Dr. Cap, published a paper in what I have no idea that was effectively titled, Evolutionists Have No Real Reason to Be Honest, which, if you had evolutionist in the title, you would probably be laughed out of just about any journal ever, even the predatory ones. But effectively what that strikes me as trying to say is that if you are accepting of evolution, you think that there is nothing wrong with lying because you have no basis for morality, so you'll just lie, right? Again, we just don't care at all about the theistic evolutionists. They get completely overlooked every time by all of these kind of rabbit ID proponents. They want to pretend like, much like Ken Ham does, that it's either young earth creationism or atheistic evolutionary theory, which is of course bunk and potentially even dumber than the other stuff that we've covered in this book. The second thing is, Baumgartner, again, supposedly an anthropologist, says that you have 4 million years to change a chimp into a human. Okay, one, the last common ancestor of humans and chimps probably lived 7 million years ago, at least by our molecular clocks and fossil record. And two, it isn't a chimpanzee that we're trying to compare here, right? Yes, we share 98.8% of our coding base pairs with modern chimpanzees, but we didn't evolve from them. We share a common ancestor. So it would not be accurate to just try to change the differences from a chimp into a human, right? Like, to try to bridge that gap using 2 extant organisms. That would be really, really, really silly. But of course, you would have to know the basics of evolution to kind of know that, right? So of course that's what our, straw man anthropologist is trying to say. And then they talk about the changes. This is something that they do a lot. Young earth creationists or ID proponents will say something along the lines of like, humans and chimps aren't 98.8% similar, but if they were, that's still a lot of DNA. And then they will turn around and they will take the less than 1% difference between chimpanzees and Neanderthals, who are comparatively 99.7% similar to humans genomically. And they'll say, look, that's so similar. Obviously, clearly, these two things are related. So, less than a percent difference between humans and chimps versus humans and Neanderthals, right? You're going from 99.7 to 98.8. But I digress. So there are a couple of different issues here, all culminating in the fact that Dr. Adam Burckhardt, our villain, right, has taken chimpanzees off campus to experiment on them in using viral transfers or horizontal gene transfer, which is a whole different bag of worms that we'll have to discuss at some point. And he's doing that in order to turn a chimpanzee into something close to a human in order to show how evolution took place specifically. Again, using 2 things that share a common ancestor, not a human and its common ancestor with chimpanzees. This would be like saying, I know that dogs and bears are related in that they share a common ancestor that is an amphicyanid, and I will prove it by changing a bear today into a dog today, which is, So a few more things happen, skipping ahead a little bit. Leah is mean to Beck some more, and Beck decides to try to, raise her place in the Sasquatch hierarchy by grooming Leah. Things go pretty well until she gets in trouble with Reuben and Jacob. They're mad. And then Cap decides to sneak into the facility at his university in order to kind of prove, his points. So while Cap is sneaking around in the lab, he is caught, and I'm just going to read this to you. He's caught by Lewis. Lewis, a towering African-American man with a lineman's body and a shaved head, gawked at Cap for a protracted moment. Cap considered trying to explain, but this ridiculous situation at the sight of this huge man struck him as stupid, so he couldn't find the right words. The big man sighed through his nose, rubbed his lips together thoughtfully, and finally asked, "Should I come back later?" Cap struggled to his feet, never breaking eye contact and trying to smile. No, I'm all through." Once on his feet, he still had to look up to meet Lewis's gaze. Lewis reached and with one finger gave the card hanging from Cap's neck a little jingle. Cap took it off hurriedly and handed it to him. Lewis looked it over as if checking for damage, then put it around his own neck. "You better get out of here," he said. "I got some crew coming in, and I don't want to be stuck explaining you." Cap inched around the big man's frame and made a beeline for the back door. "Lewis, thanks." And then that's pretty much the end of the exchange. I'm not trying to, make trouble here, but it is a little bit weird that Lewis is the only one that seems to speak with protracted slang. And he's also the only black guy in the whole book. I don't know. After this, Reed's team is still trying to find Beck. Sheriff Mills kind of splits from the group, and he seems to encounter what he thinks is a bear, but then the last transmission that they hear from him is, "Oh my god, it's walking on 2 feet." And then they find Sheriff Mills's body. So Sheriff Mills has indeed died. Sheriff Mills's body had been hurled against a tree and now lay wrapped around the trunk, crumpled and contorted like a broken doll. The earpiece lay in the grass, still connected by wire to the GPS on his left arm. Mill's rifle lay in the grass, the stock broken off. Except for a few remaining sinews and dripping arteries, the head was all but separated from the body. So, tragedy aside, Cap has gone to confront Merrill, who is the department chair for molecular biology and the head of the sciences. So, Cap busts on in, the secretary is upset, but Merrill's okay with it, and then they chat. Merrill leaned back in his chair and silently gestured. "Well?" Cap expended a few precious seconds taking a seat on the fancy leather couch. This wasn't going to be easy, but what the heck, he was already fired. "I thought you'd like to know what the Whitehome County Sheriff just found up in the National Forest with most of his bones broken and his head nearly torn off like a logging foreman from 3 Rivers who died in exactly the same way on Monday morning." Merrill showed no reaction. He simply said, "And why would I need to know that?" I would probably be asking the same thing. So basically, Cap tells Merrill what he's kind of suspecting, and then he says, "Considering what Adam Burkhart's been working on all these years, and hey, you know what? He isn't even around. I checked his office and he's on sabbatical again. How could he possibly make any money for the university when he's never even here?" Merrill's gaze was mocking. "By producing results, Cap. He produces results." Cap nodded. "And that's why the department that gets all the funding, all the money from those big corporations like Euro-Atlantic Oil and the Carlyle Foundation." As a member of academia, I can definitely vouch for the fact that massive oil conglomerates give money to the anthropology department. "So you've done some homework," said Merrill. "American Geographic and Public Broadcasting's got their fingers in it too. He's worth a lot of money to you, isn't he? Come to think of it, you just might owe him a debt of thanks for your promotion." "Jealous?" said Merrill. "Bothered for some of the same old reasons. It's not results that get the funding. It's the correct results." Give them what they want and they'll send the money. Question what they want, and what they want is science, Cap. I could never get you to understand that. "But science prides itself on being self-correcting," said Cap. Merrill looked at his watch. "I'm waiting for you to make your point." Cap leaned forward. "What if something went wrong? What if Burkhart's results weren't correct? What if people got hurt? What if people got killed. I must warn you, if you are in any way considering a violation of your confidentiality agreement, Merrill started, what do you suppose would happen to the funding, or even your job? Cap challenged. That hit home. Finally, an old, cold look returned to Merrill's eyes. As you might expect, I will not abide by what you're suggesting, nor will I dignify it with a response. I don't understand the question, and I won't respond to it. Cap knew this man. He was familiar with Merrill's style of lying. He rose from the fancy couch and leaned closely over Merrill's desk, self-correcting. I've brought you data of great interest. I'm sure if you're a scientist, Cap had what he came for. He walked out, leaving the door wide open. Merrill followed just a few seconds behind and watched him go down the hall towards the front door. The dean was not quite as poised as before, and then it turns out that Cap swiped the keys when he was doing that kind of lead-on question. There's more fruitless Bigfoot searching, and then Cap tries to break into Adam Burkhart's lab. Cap knew he wouldn't have much time, so he wasted none of it getting down a flight of steel stairs and into the subterranean world under bioscience. The main hallway was narrow, its ceiling cluttered with conduit plumbing and ductwork. The walls were a monotonous gray, undecorated except for the frequent red signs on the imposing doors that shouted danger, high voltage, this door is to remain closed at all times, and authorized personnel only. He finally came to a sign that read, blue clearance only beyond this point. Ooh, blue clearance. The scariest color. He kept going, his shoes clicking on the bare concrete. He'd been stripped of his blue clearance badge along with everything else, but maybe no one would notice, if he even encountered anyone. So far, the floor felt strangely deserted. So then he says that he feels bad that he's being a spy and like sneaking in, but he's a scientist, scientists have theories, and then they test them. And then he talks about DNA some more, and then he says, so Cap had a theory to explain. The strange sequences in the Judy lab that had revealed chimpanzee, human, and hybrid DNA all in the same animal, laced with sequences from the adenovirus that did most of the splicing. It was no accident, and there was no contamination. The presence of human DNA was intentional. So Cap finally gets into Burkhart's lab. He pulled a small cedar box from his jacket pocket, a nice keepsake Merrill had received from the American Geographic Society in recognition of his contribution to the field of evolutionary biology. It bore his name and the society's logo, laser etched onto the lid. Cap flipped it open and took out Merrill's master keys to the department's lab and classrooms. The third key Cap tried opened the door. With a quick glance up and down the hallway, so far he was sure he was still the only one here, he slipped inside, closing the door behind him. He knew where to find the light switch because he knew this place well. This was the lab of Dr. Aaron Burkhart, the unsung and secretive pioneer, poster child, Cap had often thought derisively, of molecular anthropology. In Cap's early years at university, and at the very strong suggestion of Merrill, Baumgartner, and other department colleagues, Cap had spent many hours in this room working side by side with Burkhart, supposedly to restore Cap's faith in beneficial mutations and keep him on the right path as a professor of biology. If anyone could prove that mutations really worked as a mechanism for evolving new species, it had to be Burkhart. He'd spent his whole life trying, and as Cap kept pointing out, failing. That, of course, wasn't the conclusion Cap was supposed to reach. After 2 years of working together, their respective positions became so polarized that they parted company, Burkhart to his secretive, high-priority research, and Cap to his role as the outspoken, question-asking department pariah. There's a lot to say about that, but I really do think it speaks for itself. Evolution, bad. Intelligent design, good. But Cap had no time to dwell on unpleasant memories. Right now, he had to deal with the fact that he was carrying stolen keys and would soon be caught if he didn't move quickly. He was standing in a lab that was, by all appearances though, vacant. The workbenches, once cluttered with a dozen different projects in various stages, were now clear and unused except for a few cardboard boxes that were lined up near the door. The biology posters were gone from the walls, the specimen jars were gone from the shelves, and the lab mice were gone from their cages. So it looks like Burkhart has fled. Burkhart's old desk was bare as well, so his bulletin board is gone, and all of his nice snapshots are gone, including the ones with pretty graduate students holding lab rats as they inject them, which is, I guess, supposed to tell us that Burkhart is a predator, because, you know, evolution equals predatory behavior. Burkhart's PhD diploma had been removed from the wall, but a square of unfaded paint still marked where it once hung. A Teacher of the Year plaque remained dusty and forgotten. Cap remembered Burkhart losing interest in teaching over the years, and it seemed now that Burkhart didn't care much for the memories either, nor for the young lives he'd influenced, considering the pictures that he'd left behind. So then Cap stumbles across the vestige of Burkhart's prized possessions. Inside, wrapped in several layers of newspaper to protect from breakage, were some of Burkhart's glass specimen jars. Burkhart always prided himself in his vast collection of evolutionary icons in formaldehyde, a display that once took up several shelves along the front of the room and caught the eye of anyone who dropped in. He'd bought, borrowed, and swapped with other biologists around the world to collect Galapagos finches with different-sized beaks, peppered moths, both white and gray, coelacanths that were regarded as living fossils, and bats whose wing bones bore a homologous similarity to the human hand, as well as lizards that had supposedly evolved from snakes, and a boa constrictor that had supposedly evolved from lizards, all a part of Burkhart's sideshow of the dead. These remaining jars must have been the last ones packed, still waiting to make the move, wherever they were going. So I thought I was a pretty big evolution lover and evolution fan, but it seems like Burkhart really does have me beat when it comes to being a member of the Darwinism fandom. I appear to be just a low-leveled plebe in comparison, because I have none of the icons of evolution, or at least real versions, wet-mounted behind me. I don't have a single Galapagos finch. I don't have several foot-long coelacanths. This is concerning too, because I don't think that Peretti knows how big coelacanths are. They are not small fish, and yet he's found one in a drawer that I can only assume is wet mounted, right? And then of course there's a little moment where we're mocking evolution by saying that you have lizards that evolve from snakes and then snakes that evolve from lizards. Because that's so silly, and why would evolution be so redundant? That's the point. It's primarily a chance-driven process. There is no reason why organisms can't return to more primitive states. But that's a completely different story. I like the line, sideshow of the dead, because it is very warped that a biologist has specimens that are biological in nature. And I'm also offended because I have a sideshow of the dead too, and I have never once spliced the DNA of a chimpanzee to that of a human in an attempt to create some kind of hideous humanzee hybrid. So do not cast shade upon the osteological collectors, okay? Cap pulled out one of the jars and carefully removed the newspaper wrapping. No doubt he'd seen this specimen before. Wait, no, he hadn't. This one was new. From its appearance, Cap decided, Burkhart hadn't bought or traded it. Burkhart had produced this one. This was a lab rat floating in amber preservative, a pitiful animal with a twisted spine. Cap counted them twice to be sure. 6 legs. He pulled out an unwrapped second jar. It was another lab rat, this time with mottled fur and no eyes. The third jar contained a rat with no legs at all. Cap felt his face flush and his stomach grow queasy. He rewrapped and placed the jars back in the box, not looking at the contents, trying to sell himself a foolish, vain hope that Burkhart had gotten the message and stopped with the rats, or at the very worst, chimpanzees. Burkhart was a scientist after all. Surely he knew how to read the indications of the data, especially at such a high level. At the far end of the room, a solitary animal cage caught Cap's attention. He paused in wrapping the last jar and stared at the cage for a moment, frozen in time, one hand on the jar and the other holding the lid open. He couldn't be seeing what he thought he was seeing. He wasn't ready for things to get worse. The cage was similar to a large pet carrier. The opening around the gate had been chewed off as if by an enormous rat trying to escape. The slot for the latch was nearly gouged out. Whatever Burkhart had kept in this cage, it was bigger than rats. Apparently, hopefully, Burkhart had found a bigger, tougher cage. Dr. Capella! He'd stayed too long. Turning, he saw Merrill come into the room, flanked by 2 campus police officers in gray uniforms, the university's best and biggest. I wonder if Lewis is there, since we're talking about big guys. My keys, he said, extending a hand. They're on the desk, Cap said. Merrill retrieved them. Cap, you have a choice. Leave this campus immediately and do not come back ever, or be placed under arrest right here, right now. That is just not even a choice. Obviously, he should pick one. Hi, Tim, Cap said, slowly walking forward. The first lanky cop, who was also bespectacled, said hi. Kenny, how's it going? The second cop crossed his arms over his barrel chest, nodded, and replied, it's going all right. Cap is friends with the security guards. Cap addressed Merrill. Looks like more than a sabbatical. Looks like Burkhart's pulled up and moved altogether. Which is no concern of yours, Merrill said. Cap nodded at the damaged cage. What happened? Did things get a little too tough to contain? Merrill smirked. A word to the wise, Dr. Capella, if that term means anything to you. We are all scientists here, and that means we deal in facts. You are a creationist, and now have the added liability of being a trespasser and a burglar. Before you say anything to anyone, please give careful regard to which of us has the credibility and the power to destroy the other. Creationist. Merrill used that word as an insult. Cap had seen this power trip before, and he was fed up with it. Cap and I would not get along. Is this a scientist I hear talking? Cap said. Merrill smiled. In every way, Dr. Capella. In the eyes of my peers, and most of all in the eyes of the public, I have my responsibilities, foremost among them not allowing science to be undermined by detractors like you. Science? Wouldn't it be more accurate to call it the only game in town? Cap said. Merrill turned to his cops. Get him out of here. So meanwhile, Beck is still with the Sasquatches, and they are once again being pursued by the humans. Jacob burst out of the bush, stinking and huffing so close he and Rachel almost collided. Leah followed, more frightened than Beck had ever seen her, carrying a whimpering Reuben on her back. The train was turning around. Rachel spun and moved into a run, last in line. They were heading north the way they'd come. So I didn't mention this before, but the Sasquatches also keep hearing this screaming woman, which, and you have probably already guessed this, suggests that whoever is killing all of these people probably isn't a member of our Sasquatch group, and may in fact be related to the work of Adam Burkhardt. Ooh, spooky. The humans come really close to finding Beck and the rest of the Sasquatches, who are hiding in like a big thicket of trees. In fact, like Reed comes so close with his rifle and he's just about to fire into what he thinks is, you know, potentially Beck's killer, because they find her bloody jacket, which is in fact only bloodied because of the viscera from the bear and deer blood from what the big feet keep bringing for her to eat. And Beck is like, oh my god, please don't come any closer, because Jacob is just like ready to tear into him. And then eventually she stays silent long enough, like she's got this opportunity to shout out and be like, Beck, Reed, I'm right here, it's me, Beck. But she knows if she does that, Jacob will jump out and kill him. And so she says nothing, and the humans leave, thinking Beck is dead once and for all. So Beck is spiraling into yet another minty bee, and she's kind of talking to herself as she's with the rest of the Sasquatches, who have up and moved to a new location. She's thinking, there's no way anybody's ever going to find me now. And she says, I'm alive and I can't tell him. He thinks I'm dead and he thinks that he can't save me. I may as well be dead. Oh, she moaned and writhed from pain and frustration, her voice muffled in the ground. I may as well live here until I rot, until trees start growing out of me. God hates me. Yeah, God hated her. He had to. Why else would he keep slapping her with nothing but lousy luck? Who else understood fairness enough to make sure that she never got any good breaks? Maybe those capuchins from earlier. Who else could make her dead to the world and everyone she loved, and yet leave her alive to agonize at it? It was all too perfect. It had to be planned. This is the same logic that intelligent design advocates used. It's like, oh, this is a complicated situation? Must have been God actively tinkering. That's the only explanation. Anything bad happens, someone cosmically dislikes you. A rising anger gave her just enough strength to roll over onto her back, point her finger towards the converging treetops, and whine at God. You. Oh, right, she forgot. God gave her a stutter, so she couldn't even tell him how ticked off she was. She slapped the ground and growled at him. Then she sat up and screamed at him. This upset Rachel, who'd been lying on her back in some maple bushes. She raised her head and looked over her belly. Rachel said, because, she's like a Sasquatch. She's a Bigfoot. Leah was half visible in another clump of maples, staring at Beck as she tore off broad leaves and munched on them. Beck just growled at them, waving them off. I'm all right. Don't trouble yourselves. Don't get up. Just leave me alone, she thought. Rachel's head sank to the ground again, and she let out a tired sigh. Leah regurgitated a wad of chewed leaves into her palm and started eating them a second time. Beck stared at the ground, angrily flicking tufts of moss with her fingertips. What am I going to do? Everyone thinks I'm dead. They're not going to look for me anymore. They're going to get together and have a memorial service, and then they're going to eat chicken and potato salad and go home. Reed's going to cry for me every night, and I'm going to cry for him, and the only friends I have left are these. "Ooh," she said, seething. She growled at Leah, who ignored her, and Rachel snoring somewhere beyond those big feet and that round belly. She couldn't see Jacob or Reuben, but she growled at them anyways, wherever they are. "All right, so you hate me. Well, I hate you too. If you eat me, I hope you barf." Then she watched Leah licking and nibbling her vomited wad as if it were coleslaw. These monsters enjoyed barfing. God thought of everything. What am I gonna do? She sniffed derisively at her own thoughts. Why do anything? God'll only ruin it. She dug out her hairbrush and began running it through her hair, only because it made her feel better. Maybe God wouldn't notice and make all her hair fall out. She's so mad. I mean, I kind of get it, but I do hope you appreciate, too, that at any opportunity, Peretti likes to characterize the Sasquatches, the Big Feet, as intelligent, but not more so than like an animal. He wants to make sure that they're separated very differently from humans who are, cognitively rotund, if you will. We blow them out of the water, and he has to keep it that way because, God forbid anything even approach the human level. So he continuously debases how apes function. Non-human apes, I should say. Okay, so then our hero, our intrepid hero, Beck, gets an idea, and she starts grooming Leah with her hairbrush, because she's been grooming herself with it. Leah gets curious and comes over to her, so she grooms Leah, and that pisses Reuben off, because Reuben's been using Leah as a shield, so he can basically pick on Beck, and Beck can't do anything about it. But this time, when Reuben tries to get mad at Beck, Leah steps in and kicks the shit out of her son. So it's nice for her. So Cap meets up with Nick, remember, bespectacled and rotund and romantically pulling, if you know what I mean, who is jogging. And they have a conversation, and this turns into Cap kind of spilling the beans on what he thinks is going on to Nick. Nick stared, struggling to process it all. Where's the money going? Is Merrill diverting funds? Nick thought it over for one more second, then gave in, nodding. I checked on it. The college budget's gone up the last 10 years, not down. But all the departments are being cut, including the York Center. Merrill's got some kind of pet project going. With Burkhart? Nick hesitated and Cap nudged him again. With Burkhart? That's the talk on the inside. Merrill's hoping for a big payoff to make it all legit. I mean, you wouldn't believe the big people hovering around with grant money. Like Euro Atlantic Oil and the Carlyle Foundation, said Cap. Yeah, and Mort Vernon, replied Nick. Cap hadn't seen that name in his research. The guy who owns the Evolution Channel, he said. Makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Whatever Burkhart's working on, Vernon wants first dibs to put it on TV. He sniffed a bitter chuckle. Must be pretty sexy stuff. A whole lot more exciting than inequity aversion in Capuchins. First of all, there is nothing more exciting than inequity aversion in Capuchins. Second of all, I wish we lived in a reality that had an evolution channel that was so pumped full of money by big oil that it was just the only game in town, right? Imagine if science actually worked the way that Peretti is afraid that it actually works, right? If gigantic foundations really did give grant money to studying evolutionary biology of this nature. Imagine if that happened. God, wouldn't that just be incredible? The reality is that no, that is not at all how this works, and we are, again, unfortunate enough to live in a reality where the evolution channel is just a dream, a figment of my imagination that one day I will bring to a reality. But it's a gamble, Nick said. The investors are holding back until they see results. Cap nodded to himself. Results. There was that word again. No results, no money. And Merrill will have some explaining to do, said Nick. Incorrect results, no money, Cap mused. Same thing, said Nick. So what about the chimpanzees being shipped off the campus? Any truth to that? Nick nodded. The York Center's turning away research proposals, which means we're turning away money because we don't have new chimps. We have the old standbys, but they're getting too aggressive to be useful, and we're short on younger males. What about females? They're getting old too, and you don't have younger ones to replace them. The young ones get shipped out as soon as they're old enough to breed. Orders from Merrill's office. Where do they go? Somewhere in Idaho, a place called Three Rivers. That turned Cap's head. Say again? So, it should be abundantly clear that Peretti, a creationist, is very much in the same vein as flat earthers are when they view globe heads, right? Like people who accept the globe nature of the earth don't just accept it because they think it's true. It has to be a part of a big, shadowy cabal that's funded by dark money, you know, from the highest up members of this ring of Illuminati-style bad guys who sit in their Gothic castle around a long table and discuss how to bring about the end of flat Earth, or in this case, creationism. And instead of the globe heads, it's the evolution channel, the evil evolution channel. I sleep well knowing that in some alternate reality across the endless sea of the multiverse, I am in the world of Frank Peretti, helming the evolution news and evolution channel in order to bring down my nemesis, who is of course Cap, or if this really is my fantasy, Tim Shaffy and Cap as sort of like a dynamic duo. I'm just kidding. Kind of. Anyway, so Pete and Reed decide to take a new strategy because Reed refuses to believe that Beck is dead, and after consulting with some Bigfoot enthusiasts who found big feet marks at the previous apple baiting site, he comes to the conclusion that Beck is still alive and has been kidnapped by Big Feet. And so he proposes that they steal a GPS and purposefully bait a site, leaving the GPS there for Beck to find. And that is, of course, what they do. Beck knew right away what it was. Reed, always the gadget nut, had shown her in a sporting goods store. She had managed to talk him out of buying it, but of course that reprieve only lasted a month before he brought home two. Obviously, this is a very healthy couple where they consult each other before making large purchases. After they spent some quality time together learning how the gadgets worked, he put it in his car and she put hers back in the box. But that was then. She felt no cynicism now, not the slightest tendency to brush it off as a guy thing. So she grabs the GPS and she's getting ready to utilize it when first Rachel gets it and puts it in her mouth, because remember, the Big Feet can't be that smart. And then Reuben gets it. With a shriek and without thinking, Beck took hold of Reuben's arm, reaching and grabbing with her free hand. His arm was impervious to her weight, like a thick tree branch, as he stood and lifted her torso off the ground so that her feet were dragging. She groped for a foothold. He twisted, whipping her about. She hung on, fighting to wrest the device from his fist, but then she gets the crap kicked out of her again, loses the GPS, and is depressed once more, spiraling into a third mentee bee. So she's depressed, but at their next location after the Sasquatches have moved, Beck realizes that Reuben has taken the GPS with him. So even though it's cracked, she thinks it might still work. And she resolves that she's had enough and she's going to take the GPS from Reuben. And the way that she does this, if she covers herself in sticks and mud and Sasquatch shite, and she just rubs it all over herself and puts a bunch of leaves on her head. She's basically trying to do, a dominance display. And here's how it goes. Jacob was probing the old stump for grubs, breaking off chunks of red rotten wood with his fingernails and removing the white larvae with flicks of his tongue. Delicious. Leah sat next to an elderberry bush, indulging in the leaves from a branch she'd pulled down. Rachel was picking through the hair on any part of her body that she could reach, removing seeds, twigs, and small leaves, sampling each find for flavor and edibility. Reuben was discovering how to regurgitate into his hand, but he still wasn't sure what to do with the dripping contents. The intriguing yellow object beside him on the ground, no longer an object of keen interest, but a matter of territory nonetheless. That's the GPS. All four were aware of the female human's presence on the other side of the thicket, near the tiny stream. None could see her, but they could hear her rustling about, raking the ground, often splashing a little bit in the water that there was. She puttered around before feeding, drinking, grooming herself, then grown used to her ways. But then came a strange silence that bothered them. She'd never behaved quite this way before, standing still as if hiding, lurking like a predator, even stalking in the bushes. Jacob flicked a grub into his mouth and watched the thicket, curious but not alarmed. Rachel looked over her shoulder, mildly curious, what her child was up to, and puzzled to see Jacob eating grubs from the stump when she could detect his scent from her child's direction. Leah shot a protective glance at Reuben, wary of danger. Reuben was paying attention to nothing other than the green goo in his hand and wasn't expecting, "Ay, ay, 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 Hooray! They all jumped, even Jacob, as if a cannon had gone off in the midst of them, and they started, mouths gaping, as Beck exploded from the thicket, running lopsidedly on her weak ankles, shrieking like a cougar, brandishing a club, face, arms, and torso blackened with mud except for the wide, white areas around her eyes. Because remember, apes other than humans don't have white sclera except when they do. She had even fashioned a headdress from her handkerchief and long spears of grass, creating a sunburst of grass and blowing reddish hair around her face. Startling to hear, shocking to behold, she even smelled frightening, smeared with a liberal coat of dung that made her reek as if ejected from the bowels of the alpha male himself. Behold, the best sentence in the entire book. So at this point, Beck goes for the GPS, and she ends up getting in a fight with Reuben. At the same time, Leah, Reuben's mom, jumps in to defend Reuben, and Rachel, who's Beck's adopted Bigfoot mommy, comes to her rescue, and we end up with, that's right, a Bigfoot brawl. Rachel could have been fighting the bear again. With ferocity Beck had only seen once before, Rachel forearmed Leah across the throat, knocking her back several steps, turning her. Leah into a step, about to lunge, when her eyes followed Beck's scream, and Beck caught her gaze. Leah hesitated. She stretched her neck for a better view, concern clouding her face. Beck screamed again, her hand extended. Time stood still. Leah was wide open. Rachel hammered her with a right to the chest, then a left, pushing, pummeling. Leah covered her head, struck back once, then backpedaled, still staring at Beck. Beck cried out again, hand extended. Leah moaned, pain filling her eyes. Rachel pressed her attack, snarling, hurling another double blow. Leah ducked, arms over her head, as Rachel delivered a steady and violent drumming. Then, at long last, her will broken, Leah turned tail and ran into the shelter of some trees. Reuben's bravado drained in an instant. He whimpered, looking back at Beck and then up the hill towards his mother. Finish it! It literally says finish it. Beck noticed that she was on her feet. It hurt like crazy, but she was standing. A good-sized stick lay on the ground 2 steps away. She took those steps, grabbed the stick, raised it high, and climbed the hill, closing in on Reuben one last time. He was looking for his mother when Beck brought the stick down on his shoulders, raised it, and brought it down. Again. He flinched, ducked, putting his arms over his head, and then started up the hill, retreating, ducking, whimpering. The GPS bounced to the ground and came to a rest in the shards of a rotting log. So she gets the GPS, she turns it on, and Reed, who's hanging out with Sing, they realize that the GPS has bounced to life, and they're like, oh my god, holy shit, Beck must be alive. The troop rallies together, all of our human characters, Sing, Reed, all of the tracking gang, Pete, they get together and decide that they're gonna go once and for all, they're gonna find Beck. This is the moment, this is when they're gonna do it. So they head off to do so, following the blinking GPS dot that Beck has activated, and meanwhile, Cap pulls up in his truck nearby, very close to where they are presently, in Three Pines or whatever, Three Rivers, and he finds Burkhart's cabin, Adam Burkhart's cabin. Cap said goodbye and folded his cell phone, stunned, not knowing what to feel or think except for one thing. He had to get inside this cabin. He knocked on the cabin door several times and concluded there was no one at home. He looked up and down the porch. Didn't Burkhart have a particular habit when it came to hiding keys? From his 2 years as the man's unwilling protege, Cap recalled Burkhart liked overhead places. What a weird thing to notice. Rafters, ledges, windowsills, light fixtures. He felt along the molding on top of the door. Nothing. There was a hanging flower pot next to the stairs. He reached in and fumbled among the leaves. A house key. He stopped for one more cautious look around, then let himself in. It was warm and homey inside, with a pleasant, soft furniture and a bearskin rug, a stuffed deer head, and a mounted trout with its weight and length proudly displayed on a brass placard beneath it. Fishing poles were mounted in a rack near the front door and in a cabinet with glass doors near the brick fireplace. There were rows and rows of glass jars containing Burkhart's icons of evolution. Galapagos finches with different-sized beaks, white and gray peppered moths, the coelacanths and bats. Again, coelacanths are very big. They would not fit unless they're like baby coelacanths, but neonatal coelacanths look pretty different from adult coelacanths. The lizards, the snakes, and on the top row in the place of honor, 4 new additions. Unborn chimpanzees floating in a fetal position in amber liquid, eyes half open, toothless mouths in a half yawn. Baumgartner had listed 3 possible results for tampering with a chimp's DNA. A normal, unchanged chimp, a deformed, retarded chimp, or a dead chimp. Apparently, these were the dead ones. So next they're following Beck's GPS tracker dealie, and we see, another exchange where it shows that Rachel is now dominant over Leah, but we also see that Jacob starts bristling, which means the humans are getting close. Beck is concerned both for the Sasquatches, who she has now come to be somewhat affectionate towards, as well as for the humans, whom she doesn't want ripped apart by Jacob and evidently Rachel. So she turns the GPS off. Meanwhile, Cap is sitting in the cabin. He wasn't finding much out in the little cabin other than that Burkhart was a fastidious person who always made his bed and put away his dishes. He searched and inspected his way to the back door and then gazed cautiously across the gravel alleyway to the new frontier, a huge metal outbuilding. It was time to get there and take a look. He was pushing his luck beyond acceptable risk to take any longer, and the sound immobilized him. He was stunned, a statue in the small enclosed rear porch of the cabin. Yes, he'd heard Reed describe it. Reed said it sounded like it, but Reed had sounded like a nutcase when he did. Reed was right on the money, however. From the big metal building, clear as day, Cap heard it for himself, the eerie wail of a woman in pain and despair, the cry of a banshee. So all of a sudden we hone in on Thorn and Kane, who are two guys I've not mentioned to you because they never really mattered, but now they're a little bit important because Thorn suddenly turns on Kane. Kane, who is also, and both of them are there trying to find the Big Feet, but all of a sudden Thorn turns to Kane and he's basically like pointing his rifle at him in a threatening manner. Meanwhile, Cap heads deeper into the outbuilding. The heavy metal door to the outbuilding was locked, but it had an electric locking mechanism with a numeric keypad. On a whim, Cap entered a number Burkhart had consistently used for lock entry codes and passcodes, 1859. The year Darwin's Origin of the Species was published. The mechanism whirred and then clicked, and the door opened with a slight push. I do have to admit, I think Burkhart might actually be a bigger Darwin enjoyer than I am with that move right there. At first, Cap was unsure if he entered a lab or a warehouse. The building was cavernous and well lit, with a vaulted roof that was supported by steel trusses and enough floor space to host a convention. A half-height wall divided the first section from the rear. From beyond that came the occasional stirring, banging, grunting, and hooting Cap had become familiar with at the York Center. Chimpanzees. Filling the front half of the building in geometrically arranged rows was a lab that most scientists in most major universities could only dream of. Cap performed a careful walkthrough, eyes and ears open for any human presence, which, at least for now, was strangely missing. Adam Burkhart's original basement lab had grown tenfold, dropping all the superfluous decor and warmth, and taken on the appearance of an assembly line, dedicated to specific procedures and executed efficiently and repeatedly. DNA and protein synthesis analysis, DNA sequencing, viral transfer, site-directed mutagenesis, and in large, dedicated sections towards the rear, high-volume assembly line in vitro fertilization and cloning. The woman cried again, her wail coming from over that half wall with a nerve-jangling volume of a fire alarm. Cap saw an archway leading to that side of the building, and moving quickly yet warily, he made a beeline for it. Then Thorn, basically, Thorn and Kane, Thorn's got his gun pointed at Kane, and he says to Kane, "So you really think you saw a Sasquatch?" And Kane is like, "Yes," and then Thorn shoots him, killing him instantly. I'm not kidding. So Thorn lies to the rest of the group via walkie-talkie because they all heard the gunshot, and he's like, Kane's rifle misfired, and everybody's like, oh, that's kind of weird. And then Cap continues inward and finds row upon row upon row of cages and approximately 5 to 6 female chimpanzees, all pregnant, all with scars on their abdomens, showing that they've been inseminated artificially. And then in the last, so he moves on and he says, at the end of the room was a pulled curtain. On the other side of the curtain was a clean room divided into 2 well-lit cubicles. Each was a stainless steel operating table, such as the ones that veterinarians use, but with one troubling addition: leather restraints. On each side was stocked with surgical instruments, dressings, gowns, caps, and masks. Cap was getting a picture of how the process worked. When he opened the door to the walk-in cooler just past the tables, he got his confirmation. On the shelves in Ziploc bags that were labeled and dated lay tiny unborn creatures that should have been, chimpanzees. 2 had legs, toes, and fingers so elongated so as to be useless. One on the second shelf had gone the other way, with 3-fingered stumps for arms. On the bottom shelf, thrown into a tub, were 4 little females whose legs nearly matched human proportions and whose arms were intact. They must have shown promise because they were cut open and their ovaries removed. So, it's really weird that Dr. Burkhardt, who is supposedly this genius evolutionary biologist, is trying to, again, do human evolution with an extant species that is a sister group, but more importantly, he picked a long-lived species, right? And he's trying to accelerate evolution with a species whose lifespan is, 60, 70 years, and who has a long gestation, equally as long as humans. So I guess that's why he's doing the thing where once the babies come out, he harvests the ovaries to speed up the process. But like just use a different species. I guess he's trying to do human evolution specifically so bacteria wouldn't cut it, but I don't know. It seems it's a little unrealistic. The rest of the stuff is fine though. With his eyes still fixed in horror on the eviscerated bodies of mutant unborn chimps, Cap's nerves nearly melted when a cry of the banshee rose like a goblin over the partition walls. So he creeps over and he picks up like a pipe to fight what can only be assumed is a mutant chimpanzee. And as he's walking down some more cages, he sees several more creatures. At the sight of the first creature, he had to double check not only his bowels, but his stomach. And the first cage was a quaking, nearly hairless blob with blue-veined, leathery skin. On one end were stumps that could have been legs, on the other was a head without a neck that only turned slightly when he approached. Feeding tubes ran into the broad, flat nose, pumping in temporary life. It seemed only vaguely aware of his presence. The next cage held a chimpanzee giant, grotesquely overgrown and suffering for it. Straightened out, it could have measured 8 feet from head to toe, but this poor beast was bent and crooked like an arthritic old man, not an arithmetic old man. Sitting painfully in the corner, its joints knobby, its fingers bent and useless. It tried to reach out to him, but its arm was like a gnarled limb on a dead tree. It barely moved. A shockingly white albino occupied the next cage, its cold pink eyes studying him with suspicion and loathing. It too was oversized, and judging from the crookedness of its fingers and feet, only slightly mobile. It huffed at him, then creaked and straightened to its feet to growl and threaten. The twisted legs buckled underneath it, and it fell to its haunches again, resigned to making threats that it could never carry out. After what he'd seen so far, Cap thought he was ready for the next cage. He wasn't. At first sight of him, the thing leaped at the bars, wailing and frothing, its eyes like crazed yellow orbs of a demon, its black fur bristling like a sooty explosion. It filled Cap's vision, and he slammed against the opposite wall, even before he felt the terror that put him there. This was a malformation of the highest order, a creature far removed from a chimpanzee, but not better. Though smaller than Cap in stature, it had to outweigh him 3 to 1, with muscles so pronounced they impeded its movement. It was deranged, drooling, out of control, and the cry from its throat, a scream from a madwoman. It was urinating as it clung to the bars, trying to climb them, bend them, and grab onto them with its feet, which only slid to the floor. The big, opposable toes looked to have been surgically removed. Cap inched along the wall, maintaining distance from the huge arm that groped at him through the bars, hoping to make it to a nearby exit. So the last cage is the biggest, and there's nothing in it, and it's broken open, leading us to come to the conclusion that this is the mysterious beast that is responsible for killing everything, not the Sasquatches. Woohoo! So meanwhile, Sing, who is with the rest of the group, is concerned that she hasn't heard from our previous guys, from Thorn and Kane, and she's concerned. So she radios back to Reed, and she's talking to him. She's like, hey, I don't know where everybody is, when all of a sudden she hears footsteps outside of her motorhome. The door opens, and there's Thorn, the killer. He stands up there into the driver's area, his rifle slung around his back. Sing was relieved. All right, that's one warm body accounted for. We're having trouble with the system. He broke into a tired grin. So I hear. She waited a moment, then asked, where's Kane? Her cell phone on the counter rang. Cap's special ring. She reached for it. Don't answer that, Thorne said, snatching it away. She saw him raise a pistol and almost understood before the muzzle flashed and her awareness shattered into a starburst of fragments fading to black. Her body came to a rest against the bedroom door, a pool of blood spreading beneath her head. Sing's been shot in the face! So, to the utmost horror, Cap is getting ready to get the heck out of here when he hears Merrill and his goons pull up to the front of the cabin. He tries to hide, he hides in a freezer, and then it turns out there's like a bunch of dead chimps in there, so he gets really nervous, knocks a couple of them down, and he is, of course, immediately found out. And he hears from Merrill, Dr. Capella, he said, winded and shaking, you never should have come back. Merrill and his men took Cap to an office in the corner of a lab, a simple cubicle made from sound-baffling dividers, and sat him down in one of the available chairs. So at this point, Cap is trying to figure out how he's going to be able to get out of here. And then Merrill says, "So I suppose you've seen everything, huh?" Cap studied him and his men. "Looks like you have too. Did you know what Burkhart was doing?" "We had an understanding," Merrill said. "Sometimes the greatest scientific breakthroughs have to be made in secret, away from prying eyes, politics, and the Board of Ethics." "So, how do you like his results?" Cap said. Merrill rubbed his face. "I don't suppose your so-called scientific community will be too wild about them," Cap went on. "American Geographic isn't about to publish them, and forget about public broadcasting and the Evolution Channel." Yes, the prestigious Evolution Channel. Unironically, one of my favorite parts of this book. Merrill's temper brought some of his color back. "Such steps are necessary." "To prove what?" Cap interrupted. "That random mutations work? Look around you, Merrill. Does this look random? It's planned, it's monitored, it's carefully recorded, and it still doesn't work." He spoke to the men behind him. "Burkhart's planting mutated embryos in surrogate mothers and harvesting the eggs from the offspring before they're even born," Merrill interjected, "to compress the amount of time between generations." Cap spoke to Kenny and Tim, so he can further mutate the mutants, implant the mothers, and start the process all over again. "And thereby replicate natural selection," Merrill said. Cap was so steamed up he had to stand. "Nature doesn't load the dice. You're using a lab here, Merrill. You're interposing intelligence into the process. The two guards sat him down again. "You're not only proving that random mutations don't work, you're proving that purposeful mutations don't work." He spoke to Kenny and Tim again. "Did you get a load of those monsters in there? Nice improvements on the original, don't you think?" Merrill tried to argue with his men. "Mutations are the mechanism by which—" "So where is everybody?" Cap said. Merrill wasn't in control, and it showed despite his effort to hide it. "I suppose it's their day off," he said. Cap felt sorry for the man. "Philip, come on. You figured it out as easily as I have. You know Burkhart. He's not about to let somebody else accomplish something when he's not around to take credit for it. The staff isn't here because he isn't here. And he isn't here because—" Merrill sat there, cornered and seething. Cap answered his own question. "Because his monster isn't here. You saw the hole in the wall, right?" he asked the guards. "Right?" He pointed in the direction. There went the whole experiment, along with your funding, Merrill, into the great outdoors for the whole world to see. You think Burkhart can live with that? You think he'd want you to find out?" Cap could tell Merrill knew, but the esteemed college dean didn't offer to discuss it. Cap spoke to the guards. "Burkhart's gone after it." So here, one of the big twists of the book is that Adam Burkhart had infiltrated the search group for Beck, and he's planning on killing what he thinks is doing all this killing, the escaped chimpanzee mutant. This is all happening independent to the Big Feet, mind you, which we're going to talk about that in a second. But then Merrill says, "You're a trespasser, Cap." Merrill lifted his voice. "I could have you arrested." "Trespassing where?" "Care to show this place to the police?" Cap said. Merrill fell silent again. "I'm guessing Burkhart cut the big toes off his monster so it wouldn't be arboreal and would have to evolve into a ground-dwelling, bipedal something or other." I'm going to guess that Burkhart engineered that thing to compete with any other primates it encountered. That's the natural selection thing, you know, competing with other species and prevailing, and that includes human beings. Oh, so what is this, a tacit admission that human beings are primates? Well, it's not evolving, but it is competing. It's responsible for the deaths of 4 people, one of them a dear friend, and one of them the Whitcomb County Sheriff. Merrill leaped to his feet. "You can't prove that." The hair, stool, and saliva samples, remember? So, we need to talk about this really quickly. This is also not evolution. Cutting the big toes off of chimpanzees so that their offspring will have more in-line toes is Lamarckian. You should remember this from high school biology, right? Lamarck thought that organisms changed over time because the living organism would change due to its behavior within its own life. The example that he used was giraffes. A giraffe tries to stretch its neck up, to eat the leaves, and its neck gets a little bit longer. And then its children inherit that long neck that developed during its life as a response to, environmental pressures around it. That is not how evolution works. That's Lamarckian. That was before Darwin, right? Like that was straight up before Darwin, and that's what we're using here to force these chimp mutants to evolve into, quote, a ground-dwelling, bipedal something or other. Never mind the fact that being a biped has a lot more to do with it than just having, an inline big toe and the correct proportions, right? Australopithecines, who were bipeds and did have inline big toes, they didn't have the limb proportions of a modern human. They had more chimp-like limb proportions, long arms and shorter legs. Now, slowly, over time, we start to see their limb proportions through, Australopithecus anamensis, an early Australopithecine, to the likes of Australopithecus sediba, a late Australopithecine. Their limb proportions start to look a little bit more familiar. But there's also other things that you have to be a biped, including an anterior foramen magnum, or a hole at the base of the skull to allow the vertebral column to come directly out of it, so your head can sit directly on top like this. You're not, jutting your head out like that. You have to have a valgus knee so you can hold your weight directly underneath your body. You have to have a bowl-shaped pelvis to keep all your organs from falling out, and a strong, anchor a strong pelvic floor, as well as strong glutes so that you can actually walk and maintain your balance. It's not just about the toes, and it's not Lamarckian. Fortunately, though, Cap does escape. There is no discussion about the fossil specimens that we already have, or had even in 2005, that showed that Australopithecines did evolve to be bipeds, and they were bipeds while they still had small brains. And that they probably didn't evolve from something that looked like a chimp. It probably wasn't a knuckle-walking quadruped, but rather a palmagrade, pronagrade, arboreal quadruped, right? So Cap is out of there, he's escaped, and at the same time, Reed has the unholy realization that Sam is also a plant. So not only did Thorn shoot Cain and then sing, but also Sam is for the bad guys. He's with Burkhardt and company, and he starts hunting Reed down. Another twist, Sing is not dead. She awakens barely conscious from being shot in the face. I guess it just grazed, some important stuff. They didn't specify either where she was shot, so I guess it's possible that she was only shot in the neck. But she wakes up and then decides to sneak up on Thorn, right? She sneaks up on him and plunges a knife into his thigh near the groin. He screamed in pain and horror, released his grip, and backed off. The knife slipped from the wound with a spurt of blood. His leg collapsed under him and he staggered backwards, tumbling over the fallen chair. He was distracted, disoriented, on his back. Sing's chance would not come again. Unable to rise to her feet, she lunged forward from her knees, screaming like a cougar and pouncing like a bear. Just above the belly, just below the breastbone, and just the right angle. With both hands and all her weight, she put the knife through his heart. He stared at her in disbelief, gasping and trembling until his eyes went blank, his pupils dilated, and his head clunked against the floor. His arms, then his whole body, went limp. Near his head was the Mobile Labs auxiliary gasoline cans. He wouldn't be using them. Sing rolled to the floor beside the man that she had just killed, her scream becoming a loud sob from the pain, fear, and horror. So Sing just annihilated this guy. She's been shot in the neck, and she just takes a knife and just brutalizes this dude to death. So, again, confirming why Sing is, of course, the best character. Her only flaw is that she married Cap. Starting to close in on our Sasquatch family storyline, we come to find out the reason why Rachel kidnapped Beck in the first place, which is from behind Rachel's slumped back, she peered into the broken bushes and saw a rib cage almost picked clean by the birds, the blackening meat showing red where it had been freshly torn by their beaks. Eyes widening with horror, Beck saw an arm half eaten, half covered with reddish-brown fur, with an ape's hand, 5 fingers, and a thumb. Ooh, kind of like our hands. Beck moved from Rachel's right shoulder to her left for a better look. The innards were almost completely gone, the spine, which was visible through the empty chest cavity. Beck saw the neck had been violently twisted and broken. Lying crookedly, almost separate from the body, was the rotting head of a Sasquatch child. One eye closed, one eye gone, the face pecked and gouged. The little female was Beck's size, the mouth smeared with huckleberries, and the hair, the long, magnificent hair, was reddish-brown, the same colors as Rachel's. "She was yours, wasn't she?" Rachel said. Rachel's body began to quake, and air rushed in and out of her nostrils. Like sobs? Beck, already in a state of shock, was further astonished. Was Rachel crying? Was it possible? So Beck is very sad for Rachel, and Rachel is really bummed out, and she comes to realize that these ghostly screams from this banshee woman, the killer of all these people, is not actually Rachel and the rest of the Sasquatches, but rather something else entirely. Reed is continually hunted by Sam, and while this is happening, Beck realizes that Rachel thought that she was her child. She says, I was her. You thought I was her. No wonder you wanted my hair the way that it was. Then Jacob shows up and ushers Rachel to come on with the rest of the family. And they leave. They leave Beck, and she's like floored by this. Beck backed up a step, noticing that she could. She looked over her shoulder down the hill and realized she could go there. She looked up the hill. No Jacob, no Rachel, no group. So she's totally by herself, and she turns the GPS back on, knowing that the Sasquatches will not be killed because she's no longer with them, and knowing that Rachel finally understands that Beck is not actually her child. Reed gets shot by Sam, but it's non-lethal for the time being, and then Beck hears something. She starts following towards it, and then she hears thump, drag, thump, drag. She ducked behind a tree and peeked uphill. Through the spaces in the tree, she caught a flash of black hair and a patch of yellowing flesh. Whatever it was walking. Beck only whispered, Jacob? The woman screamed in reply, so close Beck could hear the rattle of phlegm in her windpipe. Beck spun, tried to run, but her legs were weak and she fell headlong. The cry of the banshee blasted over her, around her, so close that it hurt. Thump, drag, thump, drag. And that's the end. It's the end of the book. That's how it ends. Nah, I'm just kidding. Instead, it is the horrific, monstrosity created by Adam Burkhart, and it is a mutated chimpanzee. It emerged from behind an ancient fir, thumping on one crooked leg and dragging the other, still raw, bleeding from a bullet wound. It wavered, grabbed at one tree and then at the next with long arms to steady itself, wheezing hoarsely, teeth bared, and canines glistening. It was every bit as large and powerful as Jacob, but bent, twisted, and deformed. Its black hair was sparse and patchy, bristling like the quills from its jaundiced skin. The wrinkled head was nearly bald, and only half the face was peeling, blistered and scabbed from a recent burn. When it saw her, it glared with bulbous yellow eyes and screamed a scream Beck could feel. It came after her, hobbling on uneven legs, careening, its long arms guiding it from tree to tree as it descended the slope, and still comes at Beck, and Beck thinks quickly, and she does a Sasquatch call to summon her adopted family back to help her. The mutated chimpanzee falls on its face. It writhed and flailed until it was moving again, hobbling on twos, walking on fours, stumbling on threes, shoulders uneven, knuckles skinned and bleeding. It lagged behind long enough for Beck to break into a clearing where patches of maple and elderberry grew through the crisscross of wind-fallen trunks. So this thing keeps coming at her, when all of a sudden it gets shot like 20 times in a row. Boom! The left shoulder jerked violently. Boom! The right arm jerked. Boom! The creature rolled backwards. Boom! With another blast through the chest. Its breath became a gargle. And Beck is like, oh my God, who killed this? Who is my savior? And she looks up, and her savior is none other than Adam Burkhart, who has finally caught his creature and shot it to death. So Beck is very glad to hear this, right? She's excited and happy. But then she starts to notice that all is not well, perhaps, with Adam Burkhart. Adam Burkhart sat on a log, wiping his close-shaven brow and staring at the grotesque, bleeding beast at his feet. This creature was an experiment that went terribly awry, he laughed. Makes me sound like a mad scientist, doesn't it? He quit laughing abruptly. Maybe I qualify. This is a terrible thing. Just terrible. Did it kill? And then he answers her. Yes, Randy Thompson. It killed several people. We thought it had killed you. His face was sad, yet he seemed to marvel. It was bred this way, bred to prevail, even though it can't reproduce. He pointed almost proudly. But did you notice it was trying to walk upright? We removed the big toe so it couldn't live in the trees and would have to navigate mostly on the ground. We may have confirmed our theory, but then again, the hip and knee joints are unsuitable for bipedalism, so it's hard to draw any conclusions. This man is supposed to be in the universe of Frank Peretti's Monster, like a top-tier evolutionary biologist and anthropologist. But he's just a ding-dong. He shook his head. I'm sorry, this does take a bit of explanation, doesn't it? Well, have you ever heard about how we're all 98% chimpanzee? Strip him of his degree, now. So Cap is out of there, he's escaped, and at the same time, Reed has the unholy realization that Sam is also a plant. So not only did Thorn shoot Cain and then sing, but also Sam is for the bad guys. He's with Burkhart and company, and he starts hunting Reed down. So Burkhart says, anyways, replacing his hat and eyeing Beck with a strange look of pity, what we've taught people to believe, we have yet to prove. Okay, even in 2005, that was when the chimp genome was sequenced. We are, in fact, 98.8% similar to chimpanzees. We're not 98.8% chimp. He indicated to the beast at his feet. Some could even say we've proven the opposite, which would be very difficult for us to say the least. We wouldn't want that fact to become too, noticeable. Am I making any sense? Oh no. Burckhardt disproved evolution by being a Lamarckian scientist. So then he reveals that he thinks that all of the Bigfoot prints were actually a hoax. He doesn't know about the Bigfoot group. He thinks that the only thing lurking in that forest that is a non-human primate is his creature, and then he reveals that he is going to have to kill Beck. So Reed defeats Sam in an unrelated situation here. I didn't think it was very exciting, so I didn't read it. And then Sing is like, the GPS is still beeping. Go find Beck now while you still can. And Reed is like off again. Meanwhile, Burckhardt is about to kill Beck when she makes another Sasquatch call, and out of freaking nowhere, Jacob busts in, plucks him off the ground by the wad of his jacket. The scientist dangled in the air, legs kicking, face stretched into horror, trying to chamber around and aim his rifle. Jacob didn't wait for Burckhardt to revolve such issues, but threw him into the bush, where he tumbled and thrashed out of sight in the tangle. Beck was suddenly surrounded by reddish-brown hairs, a huge pair of arms enfolded her and pulled her in. She felt against a familiar bosom, feeling a sweaty heat, inhaled a disgusting stench, and for the first time in a week felt perfectly, wondrously safe. Rachel grunted, looking down at her. Beck had seen that expression before, when she awoke in Rachel's arms in a patch of huckleberries. Jacob tromped halfway into the bush, watched Burckhardt's still body for a short time, growled a last word, then when he is satisfied, stomped out of the bushes, started to leave, but not without an obligatory glance in Beck's direction. She wanted to smile to thank him, to give him a hug, but of course he would not understand such things. She only hummed her thanks, looking just below his eye line. He huffed back at her as if to say, "This doesn't mean I like you," and then vanished into the trees. Again, debasing our wonderful Sasquatches here. So Reed stumbles into the clearing just in time to see Beck still embracing Rachel, and he is freaking out. He's getting ready to shoot at Rachel, but Rachel manages to convince him to actually take the submissive gesture and get on his hands and knees in front of Rachel, because she also knows that if he tries to shoot at Rachel, Rachel will probably tear him into 100,000 pieces. So Reed doesn't want to listen, but then he is compelled because Beck is no longer stuttering. So he does indeed bow in front of Rachel, and Rachel eventually does some more like and does these little talking sounds, and then bails. And at this point, the rest of the gang is still on their way to also join Capfind Sing and make sure that she gets the treatment that she needs. And then they go to come meet Reed and Beck because they still have the GPS. Reed gave Beck a kiss, giving no thought to the mud, blood, and filth, and then immediately turned his attention to her battered face and blood-stained shirt. Oh, good. I'm glad that he gave no thought to the trauma that Beck had been put through. Her nose and mouth had been bleeding, and then apparently wiped and smeared away with a dirty rag. What happened? So I got in a fight, said Beck. Somebody hit you? My snotty little cousin. Yes, indeed, your hominid cousin. But you're all right, right? Nothing broken, nothing. I've been worse, and I'm with you now. And she gasped, her eyes looking in horror over his shoulder. Reed spun, then froze. Max Johnson emerged from the brush, limping in pain, his shaved head scratched by the branches and bleeding. He sighted down his rifle at them. Reed spoke quietly. "Max, it's over." He waggled his head, eyes burning. "I'm sorry, Reed. I have to survive." Now, I didn't say this earlier, but Max Johnson is Adam Burckhardt. I said that he was hidden, but I didn't tell you his name because it was kind of unimportant at the time. So Adam Burckhardt is taking aim at Reed and at Beck. Beck whispered, hiding behind Reed. "He made the monster." The pieces flew together in Reed's mind. "Survive as what? You want to end up like your creation? A killer?" The man was trembling. The barrel of the rifle oscillated in erratic circles. "It's a natural process. It's been going on for billions of years." "Max, Burckhardt," he spat. "Professor Adam Burckhardt." "Okay," Reed lowered his voice. "Professor Burckhardt. You see? You have a name. You're a person. A man. You're more than the thing you made." A faint sound of a helicopter grew closer, coming closer, so it seems that Sing and Cap have alerted the authorities. Burckhardt was shaking. "I don't want to do this, but I have to survive." "As what?" Reed insisted. Burckhardt glanced at his creation. "Professor, when the chopper lands, what are they going to find standing here? A man or a monster?" So eventually Burckhardt just starts crying. "It's over, Professor," they say. And then the cops show up and they cuff him.
"You're under arrest, Nimrod."
So months after all this happens, the gang is hanging out at the Tall Pines Resort. They are having a meal together, and the following, this is technically the epilogue. So what are they going to do with that monster's carcass? Let the birds eat it? Bury it, I suppose, said Sing. Well, it's in a cooler now, said Jimmy. I didn't talk much about Jimmy, but he's an unimportant character. He just helped with the search and stuff. Just like Burkhart, Reed quipped and got a laugh. He and Merrill could end up being bunkmates, Cap ventured. Tell them about your new job, Sing prompted her husband. Now Cap had their undivided attention. Well, it looks favorable. I don't know whether the university's had a change of heart or whether they're just trying to save face, but you can't argue with the right, said Sing with an overacted pat on his hand, and that's what you are. I don't like Sing anymore. He directed his next sentence at Jimmy, which is why no one's ever found a Sasquatch skeleton. Nature has a way of erasing things. Jimmy smirked good-naturedly, hands lifted in surrender. Whatever you say, Arlen. How could anyone mock Arlen at this point? They all know about the Sasquatches. Didn't Beck find a skeleton up there? Dave asked. Reed put a hand up in caution. That's a sensitive area, Cap interjected. But remember, Jimmy, those hairs from Beck's backpack turned out to have clean DNA from a creature not yet cataloged. Nobody mutated an animal. It was the real thing. We'll talk about that in a second. Arlen notes that this red, he keeps taking these thermal images, and this red large mass keeps showing up at Tall Pines, and Reed deduces that this is probably Rachel, and Beck is like, oh my god, it's Rachel, she wants to see me, and Beck goes out into the back of Tall Pines in order to see if Rachel is there. She starts making all these calls. She didn't get her stutter back, and she's thinking about how she's changed for the better. She stood quietly listening, knowing how unlikely it would be and thinking she would never tell anyone, wondering if her whistle would carry far enough. The voice of the forest continued to speak, but it had nothing to say to her. Yes, this was foolish. The mountains were so vast and the forest so deep, the wind could be wrong. She started to go back to Tall Pines when somewhere out there far away, a tea kettle whistled. The tea kettle whistle, wavering in the main part, warbling at the end, and so much better than Beck could do it. There was nothing after that, only the breeze and the last verse of one bird's evening song. Beck cried a little, deeply happy and not having to wonder quite so much. Started back down the trail while she still had the light of the day to see her back. It could have been a bird, it could have been the bugle of an elk or the squeaking of one tree swaying against another. She couldn't be sure, but it was enough for now and maybe forever. So she goes back, she hears Rachel calling to her basically and is happy to know that all is well. And that's it. That's Monster by Frank Peretti, the superstar monster thriller that you just can't put down. As the editor of the book put it, enjoy the read, but don't blame me if you find yourself sleeping with a flashlight at your side for several months, because this time the monster is real, more real than you could imagine. But the monster was a chimpanzee that was mutated and not the Sasquatches the entire time. Which leads me to that little dollop, that little piece of info on the last page that I don't really know quite what to make of. And that's the point that the Sasquatches were not created by Adam Burkhart. They're just a wild animal that exists, that's bipedal and intelligent and has inline big toes and a valgus knee and an anterior foramen magnum and, you know, basically everything that an Australopithecine had to be a biped. So, like, what is Peretti trying to say here? Because that's what Burkhart was trying to prove, right? That nature could produce a bipedal hominin that could serve as some kind of morphologic link between ancient Miocene apes and anatomically modern humans. And Burkhart, because I'm assuming that the fossil record doesn't exist in the world of Monster, and the reality of Frank Peretti that he's kind of created here in this cinematic universe, the fossil record can't exist because no one would ever hold the opinions that they have in Monster if the fossil record did exist. Anyways, it's gotta be the case. But if this is really true, right, then, and the Sasquatches do exist and they weren't created by Adam Burkhart, then Burkhart was right. These transitional forms just do exist, right, out in the wild. and strains of them survived until now. So he's correct, and everyone else was wrong. He just went about it the wrong way. Humans aren't there yet in creating a hominin. Nature just did it. Unless they're taking sort of the opinion that Bigfoot are real, and much like chimpanzees, they are a created kind that is separate from humans, that God just made Sasquatches in the Garden of Eden. But that's kind of weird, right? Because if you found a Sasquatch skeleton in the world of Frank Peretti, it would meet all of Burkhart's criteria for being a transitional species. So what is Frank Peretti trying to say? And the truth is, I don't think Frank Peretti knows what he's trying to say. If you'll recall from the acknowledgement section, he got Jonathan Wells on his team, and Jonathan Wells is an intelligent design proponent, but he's not a young Earth creationist. He accepts the ancient age of the Earth, which would mean that the Sasquatches would just exist as some sort of separate creation through the annals of time. But then he also has David DeWitt in the acknowledgement section, who is a young Earth creationist. Right? So how would the Sasquatches come about through the young Earth creationist lens? I guess they would just also be another created kind. But in both cases, the Sasquatches would have to be brought like on Noah's Ark. And is it not kind of weird, again, that they occupy the morphology that is a transitional form, effectively? Right? The Sasquatches are very similarly presented to, at least postcranially, to what we see in Australopithecines. That's all kind of strange. So I don't think Frank Peretti knows what he wants to say. He's got an old earther and a young earther who are both kind of trying to tell him what to think about intelligent design, etc. He gets wrong the definition of evolution and fitness and natural selection. He doesn't understand really anything about the topic that he's trying to critique. And then to make matters worse, he decides to talk about like human evolution by throwing in, big feet. What does it all mean? And truthfully, I don't think it actually matters. Monster is content with its thesis being, ask questions more often. That is sufficient in of itself in the mind of Frank Peretti and those who he gave acknowledgments to take down evolutionary theory. Ask the questions. Even if the questions already have answers, asking them and pretending that there isn't an answer is sufficient to reject the idea wholesale. In this way, Monster is strikingly similar to the Kitzmiller versus Dover trial, which put intelligent design in the hot seat. In this trial, Michael Behe was placed on the stand, and in evidence against evolution, he attempted to say that we've got no idea how the blood clotting cascade could have evolved. And as a response, the prosecution presented him with stacks upon stacks upon stacks of papers, journals, and books that explained how the blood clotting cascade could have evolved. The answer was there. Behe thought asking the question was sufficient, but it's not. You have to actually address the answers that are given. But this is how intelligent design operates. Intelligent design doesn't know what it wants to say. It lacks a model and it's unscientific. It has no mechanisms. It's simply saying, boy, isn't it weird that life is so complex? And Monster just kind of does the same thing. It's content to ask, and unbothered by the fact that the answer is and always was right in front of its face. This is why Monster doesn't address things like the fossil record, why it asks if humans are really 98.8% similar to chimpanzees, but never actually presents an argument to explain why we aren't, right? It asserts that Dr. Capella was right in that we can't know how the complexity of the genetic code came about, and we can't create beneficial mutations despite not understanding how beneficial mutations and natural selection actually work. And it never actually gives you a reason to believe Capella, though. Like, where does Capella come from, right? Where's his opposing model? Because the model of intelligent design is ultimately just like a Sasquatch. We keep getting told that it's there, but no one's ever really seen one, now have they, or produced any evidence that it exists.